The samurai era of Japan represents one of the most fascinating and influential periods in world history, shaping Japanese culture, politics, warfare, and social values for centuries. The term samurai refers to the warrior class that emerged in Japan during the late Heian period and dominated the country's political and military life until the mid-19th century. Derived from the verb saburao, meaning to serve, samurai were originally retainers who served powerful nobles, but over time they evolved into a distinct social class bound by strict codes of loyalty, honor, and martial discipline. The origins of the samurai era are deeply connected to the decline of centralized imperial authority and the rise of provincial military clans, whose struggles for land and power transformed Japan from a court-centered state into a feudal warrior society. During the early Heian period, Japan was governed largely from the imperial court in Kyoto, where aristocratic families such as the Fujiwara wielded influence through political marriages and court appointments. However, as the court focused more on ceremonial life and cultural pursuits, its control over distant provinces weakened. Wealthy landowners began to establish private estates known as shoen, which were often exempt from taxes and imperial oversight. To protect these lands from bandits and rival claimants, landowners hired armed retainers. These warriors, skilled in horseback archery and swordsmanship, gradually formed the foundation of what would become the samurai class. Over generations, military skill and loyalty to one's lord became hereditary, creating powerful warrior families. By the 10th and 11th centuries, two major clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, rose to prominence as military leaders serving the imperial court while simultaneously expanding their own influence. These clans were often called upon to suppress rebellions and maintain order in the provinces, further increasing their power. The rivalry between the Taira and Minamoto eventually erupted into open conflict during the Genpei War from 1180 to 1185. This civil war marked a turning point in Japanese history, as it demonstrated that real power no longer lay with the emperor or court nobles, but with the samurai leaders who commanded armies. The Minamoto victory, particularly under the leadership of Minamoto no Yoritomo, led to the establishment of the first military government, or bakufu, in Kamakura. The Kamakura shogunate, founded in 1192, signaled the beginning of formal samurai rule in Japan. Although the emperor remained a symbolic figure, actual authority was held by the shogun, the supreme military commander. Under this system, Japan entered a feudal structure where land was granted to samurai in exchange for military service and loyalty. Samurai became not only warriors, but also administrators and local governors, responsible for collecting taxes, enforcing laws, and maintaining order in their domains. This solidified the samurai's role as the ruling class and established values that would define their identity for centuries. Central to the samurai way of life was the ethical code later known as Bushido, or the Way of the Warrior. While Bushido was not formally codified until later periods, its core principles developed during the early samurai era. These principles included loyalty to one's lord, personal honor, bravery in battle, self-discipline, and a willingness to face death without fear. The concept of honor was so deeply ingrained that disgrace was considered worse than death, leading to the ritual practice of seppuku, or self-embowelment, as a means of restoring honor after failure or shame. This intense focus on honor and duty shaped samurai behavior both on and off the battlefield. Samurai warfare during this early era differed significantly from later popular images. Early samurai were primarily mounted archers, skilled in the use of the longbow, or yumi. Battles often began with ritualized exchanges of names and challenges, reflecting the aristocratic roots of the warrior class. Over time, however, warfare became more brutal and pragmatic, especially as conflicts grew larger and involved massed infantry. The sword, particularly the katana, gradually became the symbolic weapon of the samurai, representing their soul and social status, even though bows and spears remained crucial in actual combat. Religion and philosophy also played important roles in shaping samurai culture. Shinto beliefs emphasized loyalty to one's ancestors and the divine nature of the Japanese land, reinforcing the samurai's sense of duty to their lord and country. Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism, had a profound influence on samurai thought. Zen teachings stressed meditation, mental discipline, and acceptance of impermanence, helping warriors face the constant presence of death. The idea that life was fleeting encouraged samurai to live fully and act decisively, without hesitation or fear. Despite the establishment of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan remained politically unstable. Power struggles within the warrior government, combined with external threats such as the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281, tested the resilience of the samurai system. The Mongol invasions were particularly significant as they forced the samurai to confront a foreign enemy using unfamiliar tactics, including massed infantry formations and explosive weapons. Although Japan ultimately repelled the invasions, aided by powerful typhoons, later called kamikaze, or divine winds, the cost of defense strained the shogunate's resources and weakened its authority. Many samurai were left dissatisfied, having received little reward for their service, which contributed to internal unrest. The decline of the Kamakura shogunate eventually led to its overthrow in 1333, followed by a brief restoration of imperial rule and then the rise of the Ashikaga shogunate in the Muromachi period. However, the foundations of samurai dominance had already been firmly laid. The idea that warriors, not court nobles, were best suited to govern Japan had become widely accepted. Samurai values permeated society, influencing art, literature, and social norms. Tales of heroic warriors, loyalty, and tragic sacrifice became popular themes in Japanese storytelling, reinforcing the ideals of the warrior class. In everyday life, samurai occupied a privileged position in the social hierarchy. They were allowed to carry weapons, particularly the paired swords known as daisho, which distinguished them from commoners. In return, they were expected to uphold law and order and serve their lords faithfully. Education was also important for samurai, especially for those in administrative roles. Many studied literature, history, calligraphy, and Confucian philosophy, which emphasized hierarchy, duty, and moral conduct. This blend of martial skill and intellectual cultivation set the samurai apart as both warriors and cultured elites. The early samurai era, therefore, was not merely a time of constant warfare, but a complex period of social transformation. It marked Japan's transition from a centralized imperial state to a decentralized feudal society governed by military elites. The values forged during this time, such as loyalty, honor, and discipline, would continue to shape Japanese identity long after the samurai themselves lost political power. In conclusion, Part 1 of the Samurai Era of Japan focuses on the emergence and rise of the warrior class from humble provincial origins to national rulers. Born out of the need for protection and order in a weakening imperial system, the samurai evolved into a powerful social and political force. Through conflict, loyalty, and a strict moral code, they redefined leadership and governance in Japan. The establishment of the first shogunate marked the beginning of a new age, one in which the sword held as much authority as the throne. This era set the stage for the dramatic events, legendary figures, and enduring traditions that would define the samurai legacy in the centuries to come. Following the establishment of samurai dominance in Japan, the warrior class continued to evolve through periods of conflict, political experimentation, and cultural refinement. After the fall of the Kamakura shogunate, Japan entered a phase marked by instability and shifting power structures, yet the samurai remained at the center of authority. The Ashikaga shogunate, founded in 1336 by Ashikaga Takauji, attempted to restore order while balancing imperial legitimacy and military rule. Unlike the Kamakura government, which ruled from the eastern city of Kamakura, the Ashikaga established their capital in Kyoto, closer to the emperor and aristocratic culture. This proximity influenced samurai society, blending courtly aesthetics with martial values and creating a unique cultural synthesis. The Muromachi period, under the Ashikaga shogunate, was characterized by weak central control. While the shogun held nominal authority, real power increasingly shifted to regional military governors known as daimyo. These daimyo controlled vast territories, commanded their own armies, and often acted independently of the central government. As a result, the samurai class became more localized, with loyalty focused less on the shogun and more on regional lords. This decentralization laid the groundwork for prolonged internal conflict as rival daimyo competed for land, resources, and prestige. Samurai warfare during this time became more frequent and less ritualized, reflecting the harsh realities of survival in a fragmented political landscape. One of the most significant conflicts of the Muromachi period was the Onin War, which erupted in 1467 and lasted for a decade. Initially sparked by a succession dispute within the Ashikaga family, the war quickly escalated into widespread violence involving powerful clans and their samurai retainers. Kyoto, once the cultural heart of Japan, was devastated by years of fighting, fires, and lawlessness. The Onin War effectively destroyed the authority of the Ashikaga shogunate and plunged Japan into the Sengoku period, often referred to as the Age of Warring States. During this era, samurai lived in a world of near-constant warfare, where strength, strategy, and adaptability determined survival. The Sengoku period represented both the height of samurai militarism and a time of profound transformation. Daimyo sought to expand their territories through conquest, alliances, and betrayal, relying heavily on their samurai armies. Unlike earlier periods, social mobility became more possible, as talented warriors could rise through the ranks regardless of birth. Loyalty, while still valued, became more pragmatic, with samurai sometimes switching allegiances if it meant better prospects or survival. This shift reflected the brutal realities of the age, where idealized notions of honor were often tested by the demands of war and politics. Military technology and tactics advanced significantly during the Sengoku period. The introduction of firearms, particularly the matchlock musket known as the Tanegashima, revolutionized samurai warfare. First brought to Japan by Portuguese traders in the mid-16th century, firearms were quickly adopted and mass-produced by daimyo, eager to gain an advantage. Traditional samurai skills such as swordsmanship and archery remained important, but disciplined infantry units armed with guns became decisive on the battlefield. This change challenged the traditional image of the samurai as individual heroic warriors and emphasized coordination, strategy, and large-scale organization. Despite the chaos of the Sengoku period, it also produced some of the most famous figures in samurai history. Leaders such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as powerful unifiers who sought to end centuries of civil war. Oda Nobunaga, known for his ruthless efficiency and innovative use of firearms, began the process of unification by defeating rival clans and weakening Buddhist warrior monks who opposed him. His successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, continued this effort, completing the unification of most of Japan through a combination of military campaigns, political reforms, and strategic marriages. Toyotomi Hideyoshi implemented significant social policies that reshaped the samurai class.
One of his most important reforms was the separation of warriors and peasants, known as the sword hunt, which confiscated weapons from non-samurai. This policy aimed to prevent rebellion and solidify the samurai status as the exclusive warrior class. Samurai were encouraged to live in castle towns and focus on military and administrative duties, while peasants were tied to agricultural production. This rigid social structure reinforced stability, but also marked a shift away from the fluid social mobility of the Sengoku period. After Hideyoshi's death, Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged victorious from a final power struggle, culminating in the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. His victory led to the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603, ushering in the Edo period, a time of relative peace that would last over 250 years. For the samurai, this era represented a profound transformation. With large-scale warfare largely ended, samurai were no longer constantly engaged in battle. Instead, they became bureaucrats, administrators, and scholars, serving their daimyo within a highly regulated feudal system. The Tokugawa government imposed strict control over the daimyo through policies such as sankin kotai, which required lords to spend alternating years in the shogun's capital, Edo. This system reduced the likelihood of rebellion and placed financial strain on regional lords, further strengthening central authority. Samurai, as retainers of the daimyo, were drawn into this system, receiving stipends rather than land and living in urban castle towns. Their identity as warriors persisted, but their daily lives increasingly revolved around governance, education, and ritual rather than combat. During the Edo period, the concept of Bushido was refined and idealized. Scholars and samurai thinkers codified the moral values of loyalty, honor, frugality, and self-control, often blending Confucian ethics with older warrior traditions. Samurai were expected to serve as moral exemplars, embodying discipline and ethical behavior. Education became even more important, with many samurai studying philosophy, literature, and the arts. Practices such as calligraphy, poetry, tea ceremony, and martial arts were cultivated as expressions of inner refinement and balance. At the same time, the peaceful conditions of the Edo period created tensions within the samurai class. Many samurai struggled financially as their fixed stipends failed to keep pace with rising costs of living. Some fell into debt, while others took on secondary occupations despite official restrictions. The gap between the idealized image of the honorable warrior and the realities of bureaucratic life led to a sense of identity crisis for many samurai. This tension is reflected in literature and drama of the period, which often portrayed samurai grappling with duty, poverty, and moral dilemmas. The relationship between samurai and commoners also evolved during this time. While samurai remained at the top of the social hierarchy, merchants and artisans grew increasingly wealthy due to economic expansion and urbanization. This economic shift challenged traditional social values, as wealth and influence no longer aligned neatly with status. Samurai were expected to maintain dignity and restraint, even as they depended economically on classes officially considered beneath them. This contradiction further eroded the practical power of the samurai, even as their symbolic importance remained strong. By the late Edo period, external pressures and internal weaknesses began to threaten the Tokugawa system. The arrival of Western powers in the 19th century, demanding trade and diplomatic relations, exposed Japan's military and technological limitations. Many samurai recognized the need for reform and modernization, while others clung to traditional values and isolation. These debates split the samurai class, leading to political movements that ultimately culminated in the Meiji Restoration of 1868. The Meiji Restoration marked the official end of the samurai era. The new government abolished the feudal system, eliminated samurai privileges, and established a modern conscript army. Samurai were no longer allowed to carry swords in public, and their stipends were gradually replaced or eliminated. While some former samurai successfully adapted to new roles as military officers, bureaucrats, or entrepreneurs, others resisted the changes, leading to rebellions such as the Satsuma Rebellion. Despite their defeat, the spirit and values of the samurai continued to influence Japan's modernization. In conclusion, Part 2 of the samurai era traces the transformation.
As Japan moved into the final phase of the samurai era, the legacy of the warrior class became increasingly complex, shaped by modernization, cultural memory, and ideological reinterpretation. After the Meiji Restoration dismantled the feudal order, the samurai were no longer a legally recognized class, yet their influence did not vanish. Instead, samurai ideals were absorbed into the foundations of modern Japan, reshaped to serve a new nation-state, seeking unity, discipline, and strength. The transition from feudal warriors to modern citizens was painful and uneven, but it ensured that the spirit of the samurai continued to live on in transformed ways. In the early Meiji period, the government pursued rapid modernization to resist Western imperialism. Samurai privileges such as hereditary stipends, exclusive rights to bear arms, and social status were abolished in favor of equality under the law. Many former samurai found themselves struggling to adapt to a society that valued industrial skills, commerce, and modern education over martial lineage. Some embraced change, becoming teachers, civil servants, military officers, journalists, and entrepreneurs. Their literacy, discipline, and sense of duty often gave them an advantage in navigating the new system, allowing them to play important roles in shaping modern institutions. However, not all samurai accepted the loss of their traditional way of life. For many, the abolition of sword-wearing symbolized the death of their identity. Resistance movements emerged, driven by loyalty to old values and resentment toward rapid westernization. The most famous of these uprisings was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Saigo Takamori, a former samurai who had initially supported the Meiji government. This rebellion, though ultimately crushed by the modern conscript army, became a powerful symbol of the samurai spirit, confronting the realities of a new age. Saigo himself was later romanticized as the last true samurai, embodying loyalty, honor, and tragic resistance. While the samurai class disappeared as a social institution, Bushido underwent a revival and reinterpretation. Intellectuals and nationalists reframed Bushido as a timeless moral code applicable to all Japanese citizens, not just warriors. Loyalty to one's lord was transformed into loyalty to the emperor and the state. Self-sacrifice, discipline, and obedience were promoted as civic virtues essential for national strength. This modernized Bushido played a significant role in shaping Japan's education system, military culture, and nationalism during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In the modern Japanese military, samurai ideals were consciously invoked to inspire soldiers. The emphasis on honor, endurance, and willingness to die for one's country echoed traditional warrior values. During periods of conflict, especially in the early 20th century, these ideals were used to motivate troops and justify extreme acts of sacrifice. While this interpretation of samurai ethics differed from their historical context, it demonstrated how deeply embedded the samurai legacy had become within Japan's national consciousness. Beyond politics and warfare, samurai culture continued to influence Japanese arts and aesthetics. Traditional martial arts such as kendo, judo, Pudo, and Aido evolved from combat techniques into disciplines focused on self-cultivation, respect, and inner calm.
These practices preserved the physical and philosophical aspects of samurai training while adopting them to peaceful purposes. The emphasis on form, discipline, and inner calm reflected the enduring influence of Zen Buddhism and Bushido on Japanese culture. Literature and theater also played a crucial role in preserving and reshaping the image of the samurai. Historical novels, kabuki plays, and later films portrayed samurai as noble, tragic figures caught between duty and emotion. Stories of loyal retainers, fallen heroes, and moral dilemmas reinforced the romantic image of the samurai, while often glossing over the harsher realities of feudal life. These cultural representations helped transform the samurai from historical actors into enduring symbols of Japanese identity. In the 20th century, cinema became one of the most powerful mediums for expressing samurai mythology. Samurai films, especially those directed by filmmakers like Akira Kurosawa, presented complex portrayals of warriors grappling with ethical choices, social injustice, and personal honor. These films resonated not only in Japan, but around the world, influencing global cinema and shaping international perceptions of Japanese culture. Through film, the samurai became universal figures representing timeless human struggles rather than merely historical warriors. The global fascination with samurai culture extended beyond film into popular media, including novels, comics, video games, and anime. The samurai archetype, often characterized by stoicism, mastery of the sword, and strict moral codes, became a source of inspiration across cultures. While these portrayals sometimes simplified or exaggerated historical realities, they demonstrated the enduring appeal of the samurai ideal as a symbol of discipline, honor, and inner strength. At the same time, modern historians have re-examined the samurai era with a more critical lens. Rather than viewing samurai solely as noble warriors, scholars emphasize their roles as political actors, landholders, and bureaucrats who were deeply embedded in systems of power and inequality. Samurai rule often involved harsh control over peasants, rigid social hierarchies, and frequent violence. Recognizing these complexities provides a more balanced understanding of the samurai as both cultural icons and historical figures shaped by their circumstances. The samurai legacy also influenced Japan's approach to work, organization, and social behavior in the modern era. Concepts such as loyalty to one's organization, perseverance in the face of hardship, and respect for hierarchy are sometimes linked to samurai values, though they have evolved in new contexts. While it is important not to oversimplify these connections, the cultural memory of the samurai continues to inform how discipline and responsibility are understood in Japanese society. In contemporary Japan, the samurai are remembered through museums, festivals, historical sites, and educational curricula. Castles, armor, swords, and documents serve as tangible reminders of a past that still captures the imagination. Tourism centered on samurai history allows both Japanese citizens and visitors to engage with this heritage, blending historical education with cultural pride. The enduring power of the samurai image lies in its adaptability. Over centuries, the samurai have been reinterpreted to meet the needs of different eras, from feudal lords seeking loyalty to modern states promoting nationalism to global audiences searching for meaningful symbols. This adaptability reflects the depth and complexity of the samurai tradition, which cannot be reduced to simple ideals or stereotypes. In conclusion, Part 3 of the Samurai Era explores the final transformation of the warrior class from historical rulers to cultural icons whose influence extends far beyond their time. Although the samurai ceased to exist as a social class, their values, myths, and symbols became woven into the fabric of modern Japan and global culture. Through reform, resistance, reinterpretation, and remembrance, the samurai legacy endured, evolving from the battlefield to the realm of ideas. Their story is not merely one of swords and wars, but of identity, adaptation, and the lasting power of cultural memory.
The long shadow of the samurai era continues to influence how history, morality, and identity are understood in Japan, even in the contemporary world. While the previous transformation of the samurai focused on their decline as a class and survival as an idea, this phase examines how samurai ethics, symbols, and historical memory were institutionalized, debated, and sometimes contested in modern and postmodern Japan. The samurai became more than warriors of the past. They turned into cultural reference points through which Japan interpreted its traditions, its modernization, and its place in the world. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan's leaders actively used samurai imagery to build a sense of national unity. As the country modernized rapidly, there was a fear that Western influence might erase traditional values. Samurai ideals were therefore reframed as uniquely Japanese virtues that could coexist with modern technology and governance. Textbooks, public ceremonies, and moral education emphasized loyalty, discipline, respect for authority, and self-sacrifice, all presented as inherited from the samurai tradition. This selective memory did not always reflect historical reality, but it served a powerful ideological purpose by linking modern citizens to a heroic past. Education played a crucial role in this process. Moral education programs taught children simplified versions of Bushido, emphasizing obedience, perseverance, and devotion to the nation. Historical figures from the samurai era were presented as role models, often stripped of their political complexity and human flaws. Through this process, the samurai were transformed into moral archetypes rather than historical individuals. This idealization helped create a shared national narrative, but also reduced the diversity of samurai experiences to a single, uniform image. During the early 20th century, as Japan expanded its influence abroad, samurai symbolism became increasingly tied to militarism. Soldiers were encouraged to see themselves as heirs to the samurai legacy, fighting with honor for the emperor and the nation. The willingness to endure hardship and even death was framed as a continuation of ancient warrior values. While this interpretation drew inspiration from samurai ethics, it also distorted them, emphasizing absolute obedience and sacrifice, while downplaying personal judgment and responsibility. The consequences of this ideological use of samurai imagery became evident during wartime, when extreme acts were justified in the name of honor and loyalty. After Japan's defeat in World War II, the country underwent another profound transformation. Militarism was rejected, and the values once associated with samurai-inspired nationalism were critically reassessed. For a time, the samurai legacy became controversial, associated with aggression and authoritarianism. However, rather than disappearing, samurai culture was gradually reinterpreted once again. In the post-war period, emphasis shifted away from sacrifice and obedience towards self-discipline, craftsmanship, and ethical self-improvement. This allowed samurai ideals to be reintegrated into society in a more peaceful and reflective form. Martial arts exemplify this post-war transformation. Practices such as kendo and judo were reintroduced not as military training, but as educational disciplines promoting character development. Practitioners were taught respect, humility, and control, reflecting a redefined Bushido suitable for a democratic society. These arts preserved the physical techniques and philosophical foundations of samurai training while removing their direct association with violence. Through martial arts, the samurai legacy found a new role in personal growth and cultural continuity. The samurai also became central figures in historical scholarship and public debate.
Historians began to challenge romanticized narratives, emphasizing the diversity within the samurai class and their complex roles as administrators, landlords, and political actors. Research highlighted how samurai power depended on systems of taxation, coercion, and social hierarchy, often at the expense of peasants and lower classes. This more critical approach did not diminish the importance of the samurai, but placed them within a broader social and economic context, allowing for a deeper and more nuanced understanding of their impact. At the same time, popular culture continued to celebrate the samurai in idealized forms. Television dramas, novels, manga, and anime presented samurai stories filled with emotion, conflict, and moral struggle. These works often explored timeless themes such as loyalty versus personal freedom, duty versus compassion, and tradition versus change. By situating these themes in the samurai past, creators could address modern concerns while drawing on familiar cultural symbols. The samurai thus became a bridge between history and contemporary life. International interest in samurai culture further reinforced their global significance. Museums around the world exhibit samurai armor and weapons, while academic programs study Japanese martial traditions and philosophy. The samurai have become ambassadors of Japanese culture, representing both historical depth and aesthetic refinement. This global fascination sometimes simplifies the samurai image, but it also encourages cross-cultural dialogue and appreciation of Japan's historical experiences. The symbolism of the samurai sword illustrates this enduring appeal. Historically, the sword was both a weapon and a marker of social status, embodying the warrior's honor and responsibility. In modern times, the sword has become a symbol of craftsmanship and artistic excellence. Swordsmithing is preserved as a traditional art, with master craftsmen recognized for their skill and dedication. The sword, once an instrument of war, now represents continuity, discipline, and respect for tradition. The samurai legacy also influences modern Japanese work culture, though this connection is often debated. Concepts such as dedication to one's organization, endurance under pressure, and collective responsibility are sometimes linked to samurai values. While these traits cannot be directly traced to the samurai alone, the cultural memory of the warrior class contributes to how such behaviors are understood and justified. This demonstrates how historical narratives can shape social expectations long after their original context has disappeared. In contemporary Japan, discussions about the samurai often involve questions of identity and balance. How can a society honor its traditions without being constrained by them? How can historical values be adapted to promote individual well-being rather than sacrifice? These questions reflect ongoing efforts to engage with the samurai past critically and creatively. Rather than accepting a single interpretation, modern Japan recognizes the samurai as complex figures whose legacy includes both inspiration and caution. The physical remnants of the samurai era also play an important role in cultural memory. Castles, battlefields, and preserved towns serve as spaces where history can be experienced directly. These sites attract visitors and scholars alike, fostering a tangible connection to the past. Through preservation and interpretation, the samurai era is presented not as a distant legend, but as a lived historical reality that shaped the nation. The adaptability of the samurai image is perhaps its most remarkable feature. Over centuries, the samurai have been warriors, rulers, rebels, moral exemplars, national symbols, and cultural icons. Each era reshaped their meaning to address contemporary needs and concerns. This constant reinterpretation ensures that the samurai remain relevant, not as static figures frozen in time, but as dynamic symbols open to reflection and debate. In conclusion, Part 4 of the Samurai Era explores how the legacy of the warrior class was institutionalized, challenged, and reimagined in modern and post-war Japan. From nationalist ideology to peaceful self-cultivation, from critical scholarship to popular culture, the samurai continued to evolve long after their swords were laid down. Their enduring presence reveals the power of historical memory to shape identity, values, and imagination. The samurai era did not truly end, it transformed, leaving behind a legacy that continues to influence how Japan understands its past and envisions its future.
As the understanding of the samurai era deepens, it becomes clear that its true power lies not only in historical events, but in how those events shaped long-term social psychology and cultural behavior. The samurai legacy entered a new phase in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, where memory, symbolism, and reinterpretation became more influential than direct tradition. In this stage, the samurai are no longer guides for governance or warfare, but mirrors through which modern society examines ethics, discipline, identity, and the cost of duty. This final evolution reflects how a warrior culture survives in a world defined by peace, technology, and globalization. In post-industrial Japan, the samurai image shifted from national ideology to cultural reflection. As economic growth accelerated after World War II, Japanese society faced new pressures such as corporate competition, urbanization, and social conformity. In this environment, samurai values were subtly absorbed into corporate and institutional life. Loyalty to one's company, lifelong dedication to a profession, and endurance under hardship echoed older warrior ideals, though now directed toward economic success rather than feudal service. While not a direct continuation, this cultural resonance illustrates how deeply the samurai mindset had been internalized. However, this transformation also brought criticism. Scholars and social commentators questioned whether the uncritical admiration of samurai-like endurance contributed to overwork, emotional suppression, and social rigidity. The idea of silent sacrifice, once praised as honor, began to be re-examined as a potential source of stress and imbalance. This debate reflects a broader reassessment of samurai values in a modern context, where individual well-being and personal freedom increasingly challenge traditional expectations of duty and endurance. The samurai also became central figures in discussions of masculinity and gender roles. Historically, samurai culture emphasized stoicism, emotional restraint, and martial strength, shaping ideals of male behavior. In contemporary Japan, where gender norms are evolving, these ideals are often revisited and questioned. Modern interpretations of samurai ethics increasingly emphasize inner discipline, moral courage, and responsibility, rather than physical dominance. This reinterpretation allows samurai symbolism to remain relevant without reinforcing outdated social norms. Women's roles in samurai history have also gained renewed attention. While samurai society was male-dominated, women of the warrior class played crucial roles as household managers, political actors, and defenders of family honor. Figures such as Onabugeisha, female warriors trained in weaponry, challenge simplified narratives of samurai masculinity. Modern scholarship and popular culture have begun to highlight these stories, expanding the understanding of samurai society and making its legacy more inclusive. In global popular culture, the samurai have taken on new meanings beyond Japan. International audiences often view samurai as symbols of philosophical depth, ethical struggle, and disciplined mastery. This perception has influenced leadership training, self-help philosophies, and creative industries worldwide. Concepts such as mindful action, honor-based decision-making, and mastery through repetition are frequently framed using samurai metaphors. While these interpretations are selective, they demonstrate the universal appeal of the samurai as archetypes of purposeful living. Video games and interactive media represent another significant stage in the samurai's modern evolution. Unlike passive storytelling, games allow players to inhabit the role of a samurai, making ethical choices and experiencing consequences. These narratives often explore moral ambiguity, forcing players to balance loyalty, compassion, and survival. Through this medium, samurai stories become personal experiences, reinforcing their relevance to modern ethical dilemmas rather than distant historical myths. The digital age has also transformed how samurai history is studied and shared. Online archives, virtual museums, and academic platforms allow unprecedented access to historical documents, artifacts, and research. This accessibility has democratized knowledge, enabling a more critical and diverse engagement with samurai history. Enthusiasts, scholars, and creators from around the world contribute to discussions, ensuring that the samurai narrative continues to evolve rather than remain fixed. At the same time, commercialization of the samurai image has raised concerns. Samurai aesthetics are frequently used in branding, fashion, and entertainment, sometimes stripped of historical context. While this commercialization spreads awareness, it risks reducing the samurai to visual clichés. This tension between cultural appreciation and superficial consumption highlights the challenges of preserving historical meaning in a globalized market. Museums and cultural institutions in Japan have responded by emphasizing education and authenticity. Exhibitions increasingly focus on daily life, governance, and ethical dilemmas rather than only weapons and battles. By presenting samurai as complex human beings shaped by their time, these institutions encourage deeper understanding rather than blind admiration. This approach reflects a mature engagement with history, one that values insight over nostalgia. The samurai legacy also influences contemporary ethical discussions in Japan. Concepts such as responsibility, integrity, and accountability are often framed through historical examples. Samurai stories are used in education and leadership training to illustrate moral decision-making under pressure. However, modern interpretations emphasize adaptability and empathy alongside discipline, reflecting changing societal values. In literature, modern authors continue to revisit the samurai era, not to glorify it, but to question it. Novels explore the psychological burden of honor, the pain of rigid loyalty, and the human cost of violence. These narratives often highlight internal conflict rather than external heroism, presenting samurai as individuals struggling with impossible expectations. Through this lens, the samurai era becomes a source of reflection on universal human challenges. The philosophical dimension of the samurai legacy remains particularly influential. Zen-inspired ideas of presence, acceptance, and focused action resonate strongly in a fast-paced world. Modern mindfulness practices often echo these principles, though detached from their martial origins. This philosophical continuity demonstrates how core aspects of samurai thought can transcend historical context and remain meaningful across cultures and eras. Environmental and spatial awareness, once essential for survival in battle, have also found modern parallels. Traditional samurai training emphasized harmony with surroundings, precise movement, and respect for nature. These ideas align with contemporary concerns about sustainability and balance. While indirect, this connection illustrates how ancient perspectives can inform modern values in unexpected ways. Ultimately, the samurai era endures because it offers a framework for understanding tension between duty and individuality, strength and compassion, tradition and change. These tensions are not unique to feudal Japan, they are universal human experiences. The samurai story persists because it provides a language for exploring these conflicts with depth and symbolism.
In conclusion, Part 5 of the Samurai Era examines the final transformation of the warrior legacy in a globalized, digital, and reflective world. No longer bound to swords or feudal loyalty, the samurai exist as ethical symbols, cultural archetypes, and historical lessons. Their influence can be found in workplaces, art, philosophy, and personal identity, not as rigid rules, but as evolving ideas. The samurai era, rather than ending, has become a living dialogue between past and present, reminding humanity that strength without wisdom is empty, and tradition without reflection cannot endure.
The continuing exploration of the samurai era reveals that its deepest influence lies in the psychological structures it created and the moral questions it left unresolved. Even after centuries of reinterpretation, the samurai legacy still functions as a framework through which Japan and the wider world examine power, responsibility, obedience, and personal conscience. In this phase, the samurai are best understood not as historical warriors or romantic icons, but as a long-evolving moral experiment whose outcomes continue to shape thought, behavior, and cultural debate. At the core of samurai culture was the tension between individual will and absolute loyalty. From the earliest feudal conflicts, samurai were trained to suppress personal desire in service of their lord. This suppression was not merely political, but psychological, shaping how emotions, fear, and ambition were managed. Over generations, this mindset produced remarkable discipline and social stability, but it also carried hidden costs. Modern scholars increasingly analyze the samurai era as a system that rewarded obedience while limiting moral autonomy, raising questions that remain relevant in modern institutions, such as governments, corporations, and militaries. The concept of honor, central to samurai identity, deserves particular scrutiny. Honor functioned as both an internal compass and an external pressure. A samurai's worth was measured by reputation, loyalty, and perceived integrity, often judged by others rather than by personal conscience. This externalization of morality encouraged consistency and reliability, but it also created environments where appearances mattered more than ethical reflection. In extreme cases, actions were justified not because they were morally right, but because they preserved honor. This dynamic continues to influence how honor-based cultures are understood today. Death occupied a unique position in samurai thought. Unlike many cultures that treat death as a distant or feared event, samurai training emphasized constant awareness of mortality. This awareness was intended to free the warrior from hesitation and fear, allowing decisive action. Philosophically, this produced a powerful sense of presence and focus. Psychologically, however, it normalized self-sacrifice to a degree that modern observers often find unsettling. The willingness to die for duty became a virtue, raising enduring questions about the balance between courage and self-preservation. The samurai approach to discipline further illustrates this complexity. Discipline was not only physical, but mental and emotional. Samurai were expected to control anger, suppress grief, and maintain composure under extreme stress. This emotional restraint contributed to effective leadership and battlefield efficiency, but it also limited emotional expression and vulnerability. In modern Japan, echoes of this restraint can still be seen in social behavior, where emotional control is often valued over open expression. Contemporary discussions about mental health increasingly revisit these historical roots. Another critical aspect of the samurai era was its hierarchical worldview. Society was organized around rigid ranks with clear expectations for behavior at each level. This structure provided order and predictability, reducing chaos during times of conflict.
However, it also reinforced inequality and limited social mobility for most of the population. While later periods allowed some movement within the samurai class, the overall system prioritized stability over fairness. Modern democratic values challenge this hierarchy, yet hierarchical thinking remains influential in many organizational cultures. The administrative role of samurai is often overshadowed by their martial image, but it was central to their long-term power. Samurai governed land, enforced laws, collected taxes, and resolved disputes. These responsibilities required literacy, legal knowledge, and negotiation skills. Over time, many samurai became more bureaucrats than warriors, developing systems of governance that emphasized order and continuity. This administrative legacy contributed to Japan's later ability to build efficient modern institutions, demonstrating that the samurai impact extended far beyond warfare. Corruption and abuse of power were also realities of samurai rule. While idealized narratives emphasize justice and honor, historical records reveal instances of exploitation, favoritism, and brutality. Samurai authority was often enforced through violence, particularly against peasants who had little means of resistance. Acknowledging these darker aspects is essential for a balanced understanding of the era. It reminds us that moral codes, no matter how refined, are always shaped by power relations and human limitations. The relationship between samurai and law highlights another enduring theme. Samurai were both enforcers of law and, in many cases, above it. Their status granted privileges that commoners did not share, creating a dual system of justice. This inequality was justified through ideology, portraying samurai as morally superior and therefore deserving of authority. Modern legal systems reject such distinctions, yet debates about privilege, accountability, and unequal justice continue worldwide, echoing these historical patterns. Cultural refinement within the samurai class presents a striking contrast to their violent role. Samurai patronized poetry, painting, theater, and ritual practices such as the tea ceremony. These pursuits were not mere hobbies, but extensions of discipline and self-cultivation. Aesthetic sensitivity was seen as complementary to martial strength, reflecting a holistic ideal of human development. This integration of art and discipline remains one of the most admired aspects of samurai culture, influencing modern ideas about balance between strength and sensitivity. The tea ceremony, in particular, symbolizes this synthesis. Rooted in simplicity, mindfulness, and respect, it offered samurai a space for reflection amid violence and uncertainty. The ceremony emphasized presence, humility, and impermanence, values that counterbalanced the harshness of warrior life. In modern times, this practice is often cited as evidence that samurai culture was not solely about domination, but also about inner harmony and ethical awareness. The decline of the samurai as a class did not erase these internal contradictions. Instead, they were carried forward into modern institutions. The military, education system, and corporate world inherited aspects of samurai discipline and hierarchy, sometimes without fully addressing their limitations. This inheritance explains why discussions about authority, conformity, and responsibility remain central in Japanese society. The samurai era thus functions as a historical foundation upon which modern structures were built. Global comparisons further illuminate the samurai legacy. Similar warrior classes existed elsewhere, such as European knights, but the samurai differed in their longevity and integration to governance. While knights gradually lost political power, samurai ruled Japan for centuries. This extended dominance allowed their values to penetrate deeply into cultural norms. Comparing these systems helps explain why samurai influence remains particularly strong and persistent. In philosophical terms, the samurai era raises timeless questions about the relationship between ethics and power. Can moral codes truly restrain those who hold authority, or do they primarily serve to legitimize control? The samurai experience suggests that codes like Bushido functioned as both guides and justifications, inspiring genuine virtue in some while masking injustice in others. This duality is not unique to Japan, making the samurai era a valuable case study for broader human history. Modern reinterpretations increasingly emphasize personal responsibility over blind loyalty. Contemporary thinkers draw lessons from samurai history to argue that discipline must be balanced with critical thought and honor with empathy. This shift reflects a global movement toward ethical systems that value individual conscience alongside collective duty. In this sense, the samurai legacy continues to evolve, offering caution as well as inspiration. The endurance of samurai symbolism demonstrates the power of narrative. Stories of warriors facing impossible choices resonate because they reflect universal human struggles. Whether portrayed as heroes, tragic figures, or flawed rulers, samurai characters provide a lens through which audiences explore courage, fear, and moral conflict. This narrative power ensures that the samurai remain relevant, even as historical understanding becomes more nuanced. In educational contexts, the samurai era is increasingly taught as a complex social system, rather than a simple tale of honor and swords. Students are encouraged to analyze primary sources, question myths, and understand the lived experiences of different social groups. This approach fosters critical thinking and prevents uncritical glorification of the past. By engaging with samurai history in this way, modern society honors it through understanding rather than.
The final layer of understanding the samurai era emerges when examining how memory, myth, and lived reality intersect across generations. By this stage, the samurai are no longer simply historical subjects or ethical models, but symbols shaped by storytelling, education, and collective imagination. The endurance of the samurai legacy demonstrates how societies choose to remember the past, what they emphasize, and what they quietly set aside. This process of remembering is not passive. It actively shapes identity, values, and expectations long after the original social system has vanished. Historical memory of the samurai era was never uniform. Different regions, clans, and social classes experienced samurai rule in radically different ways. For peasants, the samurai were often tax collectors and enforcers of authority, sometimes protectors, sometimes oppressors. For merchants, samurai rule created stability, but also imposed restrictions on economic freedom. For samurai themselves, the era was marked by pride, anxiety, competition, and constant pressure to live up to demanding ideals. Modern narratives often privilege the samurai perspective, but a fuller understanding requires acknowledging all these viewpoints. The transformation of samurai history into legend began even before the era ended. War tales, chronicles, and oral traditions celebrated heroic deeds and loyal sacrifices, shaping public perception. These stories were not neutral records. They were moral lessons designed to inspire obedience, courage, and devotion. Over time, repeated retellings simplified complex events into clear moral narratives, reinforcing idealized images of honor and loyalty. This myth-making process ensured that the samurai would be remembered not only for what they did, but for what society wished them to represent. This selective memory intensified during periods of social change. When Japan faced uncertainty, samurai stories offered reassurance through familiar values. During modernization, they symbolized discipline and unity. During post-war reconstruction, they were reframed as examples of perseverance and craftsmanship rather than militarism. Each era reshaped the samurai image to meet its emotional and ideological needs. This adaptability explains why the samurai remained culturally powerful despite dramatic changes in context. The role of education in shaping samurai memory cannot be overstated.
School curricula introduced generations of students to simplified versions of samurai history, emphasizing moral lessons over social complexity. While this approach fostered shared cultural references, it also limited critical engagement. In recent decades, educational reforms and historical scholarship have worked to correct this imbalance, presenting samurai history as a dynamic and contested field, rather than a static legend. This shift encourages students to see history as interpretation rather than unquestionable truth. Museums and historical sites further shape public understanding. The presentation of armor, swords, and castles often emphasizes craftsmanship and aesthetics, inviting admiration and curiosity. While visually compelling, this focus can overshadow the social realities of violence, hierarchy, and suffering. Modern curators increasingly address this challenge by contextualizing artifacts within broader narratives of daily life, governance, and conflict. This approach transforms samurai history from spectacle into inquiry. The samurai also occupy a unique position in ethical storytelling. Unlike purely mythical heroes, samurai figures are grounded in documented history, yet their stories often explore universal moral dilemmas. Loyalty versus justice, duty versus compassion, obedience versus conscience are recurring themes. These dilemmas resonate because they mirror challenges faced in modern life, from workplace ethics to civic responsibility. Samurai narratives endure because they provide a structured way to explore these tensions. In modern literature, authors often deconstruct traditional samurai ideals. Rather than portraying unwavering loyalty as virtuous, they examine its consequences. Characters struggle with regret, doubt, and moral injury, revealing the psychological cost of rigid honor codes. This literary trend reflects broader societal shifts toward valuing emotional honesty and ethical complexity. By revisiting the samurai era through this lens, writers transform it into a space for critical reflection rather than nostalgic admiration. The influence of samurai memory extends into political discourse as well. References to tradition, discipline, and national character sometimes draw implicitly on samurai imagery. While rarely explicit, these associations shape how authority and responsibility are framed. Understanding this influence helps explain why certain values carry emotional weight beyond their practical justification. The samurai past thus continues to inform political language, even when not directly acknowledged. Globalization has further complicated samurai memory. As samurai culture spreads internationally, it becomes detached from its original historical context. Foreign interpretations often emphasize individual mastery, personal honor, and philosophical depth, sometimes overlooking social hierarchy and collective obligation. While these interpretations are incomplete, they highlight aspects of samurai thought that resonate universally. This global exchange demonstrates how cultural symbols evolve as they cross boundaries. At the same time, Japanese society engages in ongoing dialogue about ownership of samurai history. Who has the authority to interpret it? How should it be represented abroad? These questions reflect broader concerns about cultural authenticity and appropriation. By participating in global conversations, Japan negotiates how its past is understood and respected, ensuring that samurai history remains a living subject rather than a frozen stereotype. The psychological appeal of the samurai archetype also deserves attention. The image of a disciplined individual guided by clear principles offers comfort in uncertain times. In a world marked by rapid change and moral ambiguity, the samurai represents clarity of purpose. This appeal explains why samurai-inspired philosophies appear in self-improvement literature and leadership training. However, such applications risk oversimplifying complex historical realities, turning nuanced traditions into motivational slogans. Modern reinterpretations increasingly emphasize balance rather than rigidity. Instead of absolute loyalty, they highlight responsibility. Instead of emotional suppression, they value self-awareness. This evolution reflects a broader cultural shift toward integrating strength with empathy. By adapting samurai ideals in this way, modern society preserves their relevance while addressing their limitations. The samurai era also provides insight into how societies manage violence. Samurai rule normalized violence as a tool of governance, regulated by codes and rituals. Modern societies reject this framework, yet continue to grapple with institutional violence through law enforcement and military power. Studying the samurai era helps illuminate how moral systems attempt to justify or restrain violence, a challenge that remains unresolved today. The relationship between individual identity and collective duty, central to samurai culture, remains a defining issue in modern life. From corporate loyalty to national service, echoes of this tension appear worldwide. The samurai experience demonstrates both the strengths and dangers of prioritizing collective goals over personal conscience. This lesson gives the samurai era enduring relevance beyond its historical boundaries. Technological change also reshapes how samurai history is experienced. Virtual reconstructions, documentaries, and digital storytelling allow immersive engagement with the past. These tools offer new opportunities for education, but also raise questions about accuracy and interpretation. As technology evolves, so too does the responsibility to present samurai history thoughtfully and critically. The endurance of samurai symbolism ultimately reflects humanity's search for meaning within systems of power. Samurai stories explore what it means to live honorably under constraint, to act decisively amid uncertainty, and to accept responsibility for one's actions. These questions transcend time and culture, ensuring that the samurai remain relevant long after their historical role has ended. In reflecting on the samurai era, it becomes clear that its value lies not in imitation, but in understanding. The samurai were products of their time, shaped by social structures, beliefs, and pressures that no longer exist. Yet their struggles illuminate universal aspects of the human condition. By studying their world honestly, modern society gains insight into its own values and contradictions. In conclusion, Part 7 of the Samurai Era examines the final dimension of legacy, memory itself. Through myth, education, culture, and global exchange,
The ultimate significance of the samurai era becomes most visible when examining how its long history continues to influence ethical reasoning, collective behavior, and cultural imagination in subtle yet persistent ways. At this stage, the samurai are no longer tied to specific institutions or historical timelines, but exist as a deep cultural layer embedded within language, symbolism, and social expectations. Their legacy operates quietly, shaping assumptions about responsibility, perseverance, and moral conduct, even among those who may never consciously think about feudal Japan. One of the most enduring impacts of the samurai era is its contribution to the concept of duty as a defining element of identity. For samurai, duty was not an external obligation, but an internalized principle that shaped every decision. This internalization created individuals who defined themselves through service rather than personal desire. In modern contexts, this mindset can be seen in professional dedication, social responsibility, and collective commitment. While the context has changed, the underlying belief that one's worth is linked to fulfilling obligations remains influential. This emphasis on duty also shaped how failure is perceived. In samurai culture, failure was not merely a mistake, but a moral event with social consequences. Reputation, family honor, and loyalty were all at stake. This created a culture of intense accountability, where individuals were expected to take full responsibility for outcomes. In contemporary Japan, this legacy can be observed in the seriousness with which responsibility is treated in public life, from corporate leadership to public service. Apologies, resignations, and public accountability often reflect this inherited moral framework. However, the psychological cost of such accountability has become an important topic of modern discussion. The samurai ideal of bearing responsibility silently can discourage open dialogue about stress, doubt, or mental strain. Modern society increasingly recognizes the need to balance responsibility with compassion and support. This shift does not reject samurai values outright, but seeks to reinterpret them in ways that promote resilience without self-destruction. The ongoing negotiation between endurance and well-being reflects the continued relevance of samurai ethics. The samurai era also left a lasting imprint on how authority is understood. Samurai authority was personal, hierarchical, and moralized. Leaders were expected to embody virtue as well as power, serving as moral examples for those beneath them. This expectation persists in modern leadership ideals, where competence alone is often considered insufficient without integrity. When leaders fail morally, public disappointment can be intense, reflecting deeply rooted expectations shaped by historical memory. At the same time, the samurai system demonstrates the dangers of unquestioned authority. Loyalty without ethical scrutiny allowed injustices to persist and abuses to be normalized. Modern democratic values emphasize accountability and transparency precisely to counter these risks. By studying the samurai era, contemporary society gains insight into why ethical leadership must include mechanisms for challenge and reform, not just personal virtue. The relationship between discipline and creativity offers another important lesson from the samurai legacy. Samurai training emphasized repetition, precision, and mastery through discipline. This approach influenced traditional arts, where strict forms serve as foundations for creative expression. In modern Japan, this balance between structure and innovation is often cited as a cultural strength. Whether in craftsmanship, design, or technology, disciplined practice enables originality rather than suppressing it. This principle, rooted in samurai culture, continues to shape creative processes. Language itself carries traces of the samurai past. Expressions related to endurance, resolve, and honor often reflect warrior values. Even when used metaphorically, these phrases reinforce cultural expectations about behavior and character. Language thus becomes a vehicle through which historical values persist, subtly guiding thought and interaction. Understanding this linguistic inheritance reveals how deeply the samurai era is woven into everyday life. The samurai relationship with nature also offers insight into their worldview. Living in an era of constant conflict, samurai developed an acute awareness of impermanence. Seasons, weather, and landscapes were not merely backgrounds, but active elements shaping fate. This sensitivity influenced poetry, art, and philosophy, fostering an appreciation for fleeting beauty. In modern environmental consciousness, echoes of this perspective can be found in respect for natural cycles and the recognition of human vulnerability within larger systems. Ritual played a crucial role in reinforcing samurai values. From formal greetings to ceremonial practices, ritual structured behavior and reinforced hierarchy. These rituals provided stability and predictability in uncertain times. Modern society continues to rely on ritual, though often unconsciously, to mark transitions, express respect, and maintain social order. The persistence of ritual reflects a human need for structure, a need the samurai era addressed with particular intensity. The samurai approach to conflict resolution also offers lessons. While warfare was central, samurai governance increasingly relied on negotiations, alliances, and legal frameworks. The shift from constant battle to administrative control demonstrates an understanding that stability requires more than force.
Modern conflict resolution similarly emphasizes dialogue and institutions, reflecting a long historical movement away from violence as the primary solution. The symbolic power of the samurai has also influenced how Japan presents itself internationally. Samurai imagery often appears in cultural diplomacy, tourism, and global branding. This imagery communicates values of discipline, craftsmanship, and historical depth. While simplified, it provides a recognizable narrative that connects past and present. The challenge lies in ensuring that such representations invite curiosity rather than reinforce stereotypes. The academic study of the samurai era continues to evolve, incorporating perspectives from sociology, psychology, and cultural studies. Scholars increasingly focus on everyday life, regional variation, and marginalized voices. This interdisciplinary approach enriches understanding and prevents the samurai from being reduced to a single narrative. It also demonstrates how historical study itself reflects contemporary values and concerns. Memory transmission across generations remains a central theme. Family stories, local histories, and regional traditions preserve unique interpretations of the samurai past. These micro-histories coexist with national narratives, creating a layered memory landscape. This diversity reminds us that history is not monolithic, but composed of many lived experiences. Recognizing this complexity fosters empathy and critical thinking. The samurai relationship with nature also offers insight into their worldview. Living in an era of constant conflict, samurai developed an acute awareness of impermanence. Seasons, weather, and landscapes were not merely backgrounds, but active elements shaping fate. This sensitivity influenced poetry, art, and philosophy, fostering an appreciation for fleeting beauty. In modern environmental consciousness, echoes of this perspective can be found in respect for natural cycles and the recognition of human vulnerability within larger systems. Ritual played a crucial role in reinforcing samurai values. From formal greetings to ceremonial practices, ritual structured behavior and reinforced hierarchy. These rituals provided stability and predictability in uncertain times. Modern society continues to rely on ritual, though often unconsciously, to mark transitions, express respect, and maintain social order. The persistence of ritual reflects a human need for structure, a need the samurai era addressed with particular intensity. The samurai approach to conflict resolution also offers lessons. While warfare was central, samurai governance increasingly relied on negotiations, alliances, and legal frameworks. The shift from constant battle to administrative control demonstrates an understanding that stability requires more than force. Modern conflict resolution similarly emphasizes dialogue and institutions, reflecting a long historical movement away from violence as the primary solution. The symbolic power of the samurai has also influenced how Japan presents itself internationally. Samurai imagery often appears in cultural diplomacy, tourism, and global branding. This imagery communicates values of discipline, craftsmanship, and historical depth. While simplified,
the final understanding of the samurai era emerges when it is viewed not as a closed chapter of history, but as a continuous influence shaping ethical imagination, social discipline, and cultural self-awareness. By this stage, the samurai no longer function as warriors, rulers, or even direct moral guides, yet their presence persists as an underlying structure of thought. The samurai era becomes a lens through which modern society interprets responsibility, identity, and the tension between individual conscience and collective expectation. This enduring presence explains why the samurai remain relevant even in a world far removed from feudal battlefields. One of the most profound legacies of the samurai era is its impact on how individuals relate to systems larger than themselves. Samurai lived within rigid frameworks of loyalty, hierarchy, and obligation. Their personal identity was inseparable from their role within a clan or domain. In modern societies, individuals are similarly embedded in institutions such as corporations, governments, and social networks. While these structures differ greatly from feudal systems, the psychological challenge remains similar: how to maintain personal integrity while fulfilling collective roles. The samurai experience offers historical insight into both the strengths and dangers of such integration. The concept of sacrifice occupies a central place in this legacy. For samurai, sacrifice was not exceptional but expected. Personal comfort, emotional expression, and even life itself could be surrendered for duty. This normalization of sacrifice created extraordinary resilience, but it also imposed heavy burdens. In contemporary contexts, sacrifice is often praised in professions such as healthcare, public service, and emergency response. The samurai era reminds us that while sacrifice can sustain societies, it must be balanced with care for those who bear its weight. Otherwise, sacrifice becomes exploitation rather than virtue. The samurai relationship with time also shaped their worldview. Living under constant threat, samurai developed an acute awareness of impermanence. This awareness fostered decisiveness and presence, encouraging action without hesitation. In modern life, where distractions are constant and decisions often delayed, this aspect of samurai thought holds renewed appeal. The emphasis on focused action and acceptance of uncertainty resonates with contemporary philosophies that value mindfulness and intentional living. Yet the samurai example also warns against glorifying urgency at the expense of reflection. Honor, as understood by the samurai, functioned as a social contract. It regulated behavior by aligning personal reputation with collective expectations. This mechanism reduced the need for constant enforcement as individuals internalized standards of conduct. Modern societies rely on similar mechanisms, such as professional ethics and social norms. However, the samurai era demonstrates how honor systems can become rigid, punishing deviation even when moral judgment demands flexibility. This tension highlights the need for ethical systems that allow dissent and moral growth. The samurai era also shaped attitudes toward failure. Failure was not merely an outcome, but a reflection of character. This belief encouraged accountability, but also intensified shame. In modern cultures, particularly those influenced by samurai values, failure can carry deep emotional consequences. Contemporary movements advocating resilience and learning from failure represent an attempt to soften this legacy without abandoning responsibility. The samurai past thus informs ongoing debates about how societies should respond to error and imperfection. Leadership ideals derived from the samurai era continue to influence expectations of authority. Samurai leaders were expected to lead by example, demonstrating courage, discipline, and moral resolve. This ideal persists in modern leadership models that emphasize integrity and responsibility. However, the samurai experience also reveals the limitations of virtue-based leadership when unchecked by institutional safeguards. Charismatic authority can inspire loyalty, but without accountability, it can also enable abuse. This lesson remains highly relevant in modern political and organizational life. The samurai approach to education further illustrates their lasting influence. Training emphasized repetition, mentorship, and gradual mastery. Knowledge was transmitted through close relationships rather than abstract instruction. Modern educational theories increasingly recognize the value of experiential learning and mentorship, echoing these older practices. At the same time, the exclusivity of samurai education highlights the importance of accessibility and inclusivity in modern systems. Learning from the past involves adapting its strengths while correcting its limitations. The emotional discipline cultivated by samurai culture has left a complex inheritance.
Emotional restraint enabled warriors to function under extreme stress, but it also discouraged vulnerability. In modern Japan and beyond, this legacy influences how emotions are expressed and managed. Contemporary discussions about mental health increasingly challenge the idea that strength requires silence. By revisiting samurai history, society gains a deeper understanding of how cultural expectations shape emotional well-being across generations. The samurai era also offers insight into how violence is morally framed. Samurai violence was regulated by codes, rituals, and narratives that gave it meaning. This moral framing distinguished sanctioned violence from chaos. Modern societies similarly regulate violence through laws and institutions, yet continue to grapple with its ethical implications. Studying samurai practices reveals how moral narratives can both restrain and legitimize violence, a duality that remains relevant in discussions of military and law enforcement ethics. Cultural memory plays a decisive role in preserving the samurai legacy. Memory is not static. It is curated, interpreted, and reshaped. Each generation selects aspects of the samurai past that resonate with contemporary concerns. This process explains why the samurai can simultaneously represent discipline, artistry, nationalism, and philosophical depth. Understanding this selective memory encourages critical engagement rather than passive admiration. The globalization of samurai imagery adds another layer of complexity. Outside Japan, samurai are often viewed through romantic or philosophical lenses, detached from historical context. While these interpretations spread awareness, they can obscure social realities such as hierarchy and inequality. This global reinterpretation demonstrates how cultural symbols evolve as they cross boundaries. It also highlights the responsibility of educators and creators to present nuanced representations. Technology has transformed access to samurai history, enabling digital reconstructions, documentaries, and interactive learning. These tools offer unprecedented opportunities for engagement, but also risk oversimplification. The challenge lies in using technology to deepen understanding rather than replace it with spectacle. The samurai era, rich in complexity, demands thoughtful presentation to avoid reducing it to mere entertainment. The persistence of samurai symbolism in modern ethics reflects a broader human tendency to seek guidance from the past. Historical narratives provide continuity and meaning, especially during periods of rapid change. The samurai era offers a structured moral universe that contrasts with modern ambiguity. However, its value lies not in providing fixed answers, but in prompting reflection on enduring dilemmas. One of the most important lessons of the samurai era is adaptability. The samurai survived for centuries by redefining their roles, from warriors to administrators to cultural symbols. Their eventual disappearance as a class was not due to moral failure, but to structural transformation. This adaptability offers a powerful lesson for modern societies facing technological and social change. Traditions endure not by resisting change, but by engaging it thoughtfully. The samurai legacy also underscores the importance of ethical balance. Discipline without compassion becomes cruelty. Loyalty without conscience becomes blind obedience. Honor without reflection becomes rigidity. These imbalances are not unique to the samurai era, but their history provides a clear illustration of their consequences. By studying these patterns, modern society gains tools for ethical self-examination. In cultural expression, the samurai continue to serve as symbols of inner conflict. Art, literature, and film use samurai figures to explore questions of identity, purpose, and moral choice. These stories resonate because they mirror modern struggles, even when set in distant times. The samurai endure as narrative figures because they embody the tension between ideals and reality. The educational value of the samurai era lies in its complexity. Simplified narratives.
The final chapter of the samurai era is best understood not as an ending, but as a transformation of meaning, where history dissolves into philosophy and lived memory becomes cultural instinct. Because by the time the samurai ceased to exist as a formal class, their values had already embedded themselves deeply into the social and psychological fabric of Japan and far beyond it, shaping how people thought about duty, effort, restraint, honor, and perseverance in ways that no political decree could erase. When the Meiji Restoration dismantled feudal hierarchies, abolished stipends, and replaced swords with uniforms and rifles, it did not destroy the samurai spirit, but redirected it into new forms, allowing the ethical framework of the warrior to migrate into modern professions, national identity, and personal conduct. Former samurai became teachers, bureaucrats, military officers, engineers, and intellectuals, carrying with them habits of discipline, loyalty to institutions, and a belief that personal worth was proven through service rather than comfort. This transition illustrates a central truth of the samurai era. Its power never lay solely in weapons or social rank, but in an internalized code that could survive even when external structures collapsed. The modern Japanese work ethic, with its emphasis on dedication, endurance, and collective responsibility, reflects this inheritance, revealing how samurai values were secularized and adapted to industrial and post-industrial realities. Yet this legacy is not without tension, because the same traits that enabled rapid modernization also contributed to social pressures, emotional suppression, and the expectation of self-sacrifice without complaint, showing that historical virtues can become modern burdens when applied without reflection. The samurai concept of loyalty, once directed toward a lord, gradually shifted toward the state, the company, or the group, creating a continuity of obligation that helped stabilize society but also limited individual expression. This transformation became especially visible in the 20th century, when militarism and nationalism selectively revived samurai. The final chapter of the samurai era is best understood not as an ending, but as a transformation of meaning, where history dissolves into philosophy and lived memory becomes cultural instinct. Because by the time the samurai ceased to exist as a formal class, their values had already embedded themselves deeply into the social and psychological fabric of Japan and far beyond it, shaping how people thought about duty, effort, restraint, honor, and perseverance in ways that no political decree could erase. When the Meiji Restoration dismantled feudal hierarchies, abolished stipends, and replaced swords with uniforms and rifles, it did not destroy the samurai spirit, but redirected it into new forms, allowing the ethical framework of the warrior to migrate into modern professions, national identity, and personal conduct. Former samurai became teachers, bureaucrats, military officers, engineers, and intellectuals, carrying with them habits of discipline, loyalty to institutions, and a belief that personal worth was proven through service rather than comfort. This transition illustrates a central truth of the samurai era. Its power never lay solely in weapons or social rank, but in an internalized code that could survive even when external structures collapsed. The modern Japanese work ethic, with its emphasis on dedication, endurance, and collective responsibility, reflects this inheritance, revealing how samurai values were secularized and adapted to industrial and post-industrial realities. Yet this legacy is not without tension, because the same traits that enabled rapid modernization also contributed to social pressures, emotional suppression, and the expectation of self-sacrifice without complaint, showing that historical virtues can become modern burdens when applied without reflection. The samurai concept of loyalty, once directed toward a lord, gradually shifted toward the state, the company, or the group, creating a continuity of obligation that helped stabilize society but also limited individual expression. This transformation became especially visible in the 20th century, when militarism and nationalism selectively revived samurai imagery to legitimize sacrifice and obedience, demonstrating how history can be mobilized for ideological purposes. The misuse of samurai symbolism during periods of conflict does not negate the deeper philosophical richness of the tradition, but it does serve as a warning about how easily ideals can be distorted when detached from ethical balance. After the devastation of war, Japan once again reinterpreted the samurai legacy, emphasizing discipline, craftsmanship, and quiet perseverance rather than violence, allowing the warrior ethos to re-emerge in peaceful forms, such as martial arts, business culture, and artistic practice. Martial arts like kendo, judo, and aikido preserved the physical discipline of the samurai while reframing combat as a path to self-mastery rather than domination, illustrating how ancient practices could evolve to meet modern ethical standards. In these disciplines, victory over others became secondary to victory over the self, reflecting a philosophical maturation of the warrior ideal. Literature and cinema further expanded this reinterpretation, using samurai narratives to explore universal themes of moral conflict, social change, and the cost of loyalty, ensuring that the samurai remained relevant not as historical curiosities, but as mirrors of human struggle. International fascination with samurai culture amplified this process, transforming the samurai into global symbols of honor and discipline, though often simplified or romanticized. While such representations sometimes overlook historical complexity, they also testify to the universal appeal of stories about individuals navigating rigid systems while striving to preserve integrity. The samurai era thus transcends national boundaries, offering insights into how humans everywhere grapple with authority, responsibility, and the fear of meaninglessness. At its core, the samurai tradition confronts the question of how to live well in a world defined by impermanence, hierarchy, and conflict, a question that remains unresolved in any age. The emphasis on preparedness for death was not a morbid obsession, but a strategy for living fully, encouraging decisiveness and clarity of purpose, yet it also risked devaluing life when misapplied. Modern interpretations increasingly focus on the life-affirming aspects of this philosophy, highlighting mindfulness, presence, and ethical consistency rather than fatalism. Education systems, leadership training, and personal development philosophies continue to draw inspiration from samurai principles, adapting them to contexts that value collaboration, creativity, and emotional intelligence alongside discipline. This adaptation underscores the importance of historical literacy, because understanding where these values come from allows societies to choose consciously how to apply them, rather than inheriting them uncritically. The samurai era teaches that strength without compassion becomes cruelty, that loyalty without conscience becomes oppression, and that honor without humility becomes arrogance, lessons as relevant in corporate boardrooms and political institutions as they were on feudal battlefields. The endurance of the samurai legacy also reveals how cultures preserve meaning through storytelling, ritual, and symbolism, ensuring continuity even amid radical change. Museums, festivals, and educational curricula do more than preserve artifacts. They sustain conversations about identity and ethics that connect past and present. In this sense, the samurai era functions as a moral archive, offering examples, warnings, and inspirations rather than prescriptions. Its study encourages critical engagement with tradition, recognizing that reverence must be balanced with analysis. The final lesson of the samurai era is adaptability rooted in principle, the ability to change form without losing core values, a lesson that resonates strongly in a rapidly changing world marked by technological disruption and social uncertainty. As individuals and societies face new challenges, the samurai experience reminds us that survival depends not only on innovation, but on ethical coherence. The samurai are gone as a class, their castles turned into museums and their swords into symbols, but their questions remain alive, asking each generation how to act with integrity when rules shift, how to serve without losing oneself, and how to find meaning in commitment without surrendering humanity. In this way, the samurai era does not conclude with silence, but with an open dialogue that continues to shape thought, behavior, and imagination, making Part 10 not an end, but a reflection point, where history becomes guidance and the past continues to speak through the choices of the present.
The samurai era, spanning several centuries, was not merely a historical phenomenon, but a complex cultural, social, and psychological system whose influence persists long after the formal dissolution of the warrior class. By the 11th part of this exploration, it becomes necessary to analyze the samurai not only as a military elite, but also as an enduring framework for understanding social order, personal ethics, and human behavior. Unlike transient historical events, the samurai legacy permeated the structure of society itself, shaping notions of loyalty, discipline, responsibility, and honor in ways that modern observers can trace across generations. The codification of Bushido, often translated as the way of the warrior, provided an explicit ethical guide, but its implicit influence extended far beyond written codes, embedding itself into the collective consciousness of Japanese society. Bushido emphasized virtues such as courage, honesty, benevolence, respect, honor, and self-discipline, principles intended to govern behavior both on the battlefield and in social life. These virtues were not abstract ideals, they were practical tools designed to maintain order, ensure cohesion within clans, and provide clear moral boundaries for action. However, as with any system rooted in hierarchy, the application of Bushido was complex and often contradictory. While it inspired valor and integrity, it also created pressures that could result in rigid conformity, social stratification, and suppression of individual will. Understanding the duality of Bushido is essential to comprehending how samurai culture operated across different strata of society and how it continues to resonate in modern contexts. One of the most significant features of the samurai era was the integration of martial and civil responsibilities. Samurai were not only warriors, but also administrators, advisors, and cultural patrons. Their role in governance required literacy, strategic thinking, and an understanding of law and negotiation. This dual capacity fostered a class of individuals who could navigate both violence and bureaucracy, ensuring the stability and continuity of feudal domains. In doing so, the samurai became central to the maintenance of social hierarchies and the enforcement of law, shaping patterns of authority and accountability that influenced Japanese governance long after the Edo period. The physical discipline of the samurai was closely intertwined with psychological and philosophical training. Mastery of weapons, martial techniques, and battlefield tactics was complemented by meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and tea ceremony, reflecting a holistic approach to personal development. This cultivation of both body and mind allowed the samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis while maintaining composure and clarity. Modern practitioners of martial arts, mindfulness techniques, and leadership training can trace the roots of these integrated practices to samurai pedagogy, illustrating the continuity of their influence in contemporary life. Samurai culture was also deeply engaged with the concepts of mortality and impermanence. Awareness of death was not morbid, but pragmatic, intended to eliminate hesitation and cultivate resolve. The practice of seppuku, or ritual suicide, exemplifies the extremity of these values, wherein personal honor and social obligation outweighed individual survival. While such practices are culturally specific, the underlying principle, acknowledging and confronting the inevitability of death to live ethically, has parallels in philosophical traditions worldwide. This approach fostered a clarity of purpose and moral seriousness that distinguished the samurai from other warrior classes globally, embedding a psychological rigor into Japanese culture that persisted well beyond the feudal era. Another essential aspect of the samurai era was the role of ritual and symbolism in regulating behavior and maintaining cohesion. Ceremonies, formal greetings, attire, and martial displays all served to communicate status, intention, and ethical standing. By embedding social norms into ritualized behavior, the samurai ensured a level of predictability and order within a complex and often unstable social environment. Modern Japan retains echoes of this ritualized structure in business etiquette, educational practices, and public ceremony, demonstrating the enduring impact of samurai-derived cultural codes. Gender roles within samurai society offer further insight into the era's complexity. While the majority of samurai were men, women of samurai households, known as onabugeisha, played crucial roles in defense, administration, and education within the family domain. They were trained in weaponry and strategy, often assuming leadership in times of crisis. Contemporary scholarship increasingly highlights these contributions, challenging narratives that reduce the samurai to an exclusively male phenomenon. Recognition of female agency within the samurai class adds nuance to our understanding of social organization and ethical expectation in feudal Japan. Economically, the samurai were both enforcers and participants in a system that balanced land ownership, taxation, and trade. Their stipends, often paid in rice, tied their status to agricultural productivity and local governance. This system reinforced loyalty while creating dependencies that structured regional economies. The balance between martial prowess and economic oversight illustrates the multidimensional role of samurai in sustaining societal stability. Mismanagement or corruption, however, demonstrates the vulnerabilities inherent in such a system, offering lessons on accountability that remain relevant in modern organizational contexts. Philosophy and aesthetics were central to the samurai identity. Zen Buddhism, in particular, influenced both mental training and artistic expression. Meditation, brush painting, garden design, and tea ceremony reflected a holistic approach to personal development. This cultivation of both body and mind allowed the samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis while maintaining composure and clarity. Modern practitioners of martial arts, mindfulness techniques, and leadership training can trace the roots of these integrated practices to samurai pedagogy, illustrating the continuity of their influence in contemporary life. Samurai culture was also deeply engaged with the concepts of mortality and impermanence. Awareness of death was not morbid, but pragmatic, intended to eliminate hesitation and cultivate resolve. The practice of seppuku, or ritual suicide, exemplifies the extremity of these values, wherein personal honor and social obligation outweighed individual survival. While such practices are culturally specific, the underlying principle, acknowledging and confronting the inevitability of death to live ethically, has parallels in philosophical traditions worldwide. This approach fostered a clarity of purpose and moral seriousness that distinguished the samurai from other warrior classes globally, embedding a psychological rigor into Japanese culture that persisted well beyond the feudal era. Another essential aspect of the samurai era was the role of ritual and symbolism in regulating behavior and maintaining cohesion. Ceremonies, formal greetings, attire, and martial displays all served to communicate status, intention, and ethical standing. By embedding social norms into ritualized behavior, the samurai ensured a level of predictability and order within a complex and often unstable social environment. Modern Japan retains echoes of this ritualized structure in business etiquette, educational practices, and public ceremony, demonstrating the enduring impact of samurai-derived cultural codes. Gender roles within samurai society offer further insight into the era's complexity. While the majority of samurai were men, women of samurai households, known as onabugeisha, played crucial roles in defense, administration, and education within the family domain. They were trained in weaponry and strategy, often assuming leadership in times of crisis. Contemporary scholarship increasingly highlights these contributions, challenging narratives that reduce the samurai to an exclusively male phenomenon. Recognition of female agency within the samurai class adds nuance to our understanding of social organization and ethical expectation in feudal Japan. Economically, the samurai were both enforcers and participants in a system that balanced land ownership, taxation, and trade. Their stipends, often paid in rice, tied their status to agricultural productivity and local governance.
This system reinforced loyalty while creating dependencies that structured regional economies. The balance between martial prowess and economic oversight illustrates the multidimensional role of samurai in sustaining societal stability. Mismanagement or corruption, however, demonstrates the vulnerabilities inherent in such a system, offering lessons on accountability that remain relevant in modern organizational contexts. Philosophy and aesthetics were central to the samurai identity. Zen Buddhism, in particular, influenced both mental training and artistic expression. Meditation, brush painting, garden design, and tea ceremony reflected a holistic approach to personal development. This cultivation of both body and mind allowed the samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis while maintaining composure and clarity. Modern practitioners of martial arts, mindfulness techniques, and leadership training can trace the roots of these integrated practices to samurai pedagogy, illustrating the continuity of their influence in contemporary life. Samurai culture was also deeply engaged with
The study of the samurai era reaches its penultimate depth when considering the ways in which the warrior class shaped not only the immediate structures of governance and warfare, but also the long-term cultural, philosophical, and social identity of Japan. The samurai were not simply individuals who carried swords. They were the embodiment of a complex moral, psychological, and administrative system whose influence extends beyond the historical timeline into contemporary society and global consciousness. Central to this enduring legacy is the codification of ethical principles, social discipline, and personal cultivation that formed the core of samurai identity, often expressed through the philosophy of Bushido, the way of the warrior, which integrated courage, loyalty, honor, integrity, and self-discipline into a cohesive moral framework. This framework was designed to regulate behavior in contexts as diverse as battlefield engagements, governance, social interactions, and cultural patronage, ensuring that samurai acted with consistency and moral clarity while maintaining social cohesion within a rigid hierarchical system. Bushido was not merely theoretical, it was internalized through rigorous training, repetitive ritual, and constant exposure to both moral and practical challenges, producing individuals who could navigate complex ethical dilemmas with composure. Yet the dual nature of these values also created tension. The same principles that fostered discipline and responsibility could result in rigidity, suppression of individuality, and the moral rationalization of violence when misapplied or detached from reflection. This inherent tension is key to understanding the continuing relevance of the samurai era, because it demonstrates that ethical systems function both as guides and constraints, and their interpretation shapes social outcomes. Administrative functions of the samurai illustrate the breadth of their societal role. Samurai were often responsible for tax collection, legal adjudication, land management, and mediation between different social strata, tasks that required literacy, strategic thinking, and knowledge of local conditions. In many regions, the samurai were as much bureaucrats as warriors, balancing the imperatives of governance with the obligations of martial duty. Their capacity to integrate administrative skill with combat readiness allowed for the stabilization of feudal domains over extended periods, reducing internal conflict and ensuring continuity of order in a society that might otherwise have been fractured by competing interests. This duality of martial prowess and civil competence underscores the sophistication of samurai society, revealing how a warrior class could simultaneously enforce authority and cultivate institutional longevity. Discipline was central to both spheres of activity. Physical training prepared samurai for the battlefield, emphasizing precision, endurance, and tactical acumen, while psychological and philosophical training prepared them to exercise judgment, restraint, and ethical reasoning under pressure. Practices such as meditation, poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony fostered focus, patience, and moral awareness, reflecting the belief that mastery of the self was inseparable from mastery of one's external duties.
The integration of aesthetic and martial disciplines demonstrated a holistic vision of human development, one that valued the cultivation of both strength and sensibility. The samurai relationship with death and impermanence shaped their worldview and ethical practice. Awareness of mortality was not morbid, but pragmatic. It encouraged decisiveness, moral clarity, and detachment from fear in moments of crisis. Ritualized practices such as seppuku exemplify the extremes of this ethic, where honor and duty could outweigh survival, illustrating the profound weight given to ethical and social obligations. While such practices may seem extreme from a modern perspective, they illuminate the psychological architecture of samurai society, which placed moral consistency and collective expectation above individual desire. At the same time, the samurai era cultivated resilience, focus, and psychological preparedness, traits that continue to influence contemporary Japanese culture in attitudes toward responsibility, professionalism, and self-control. Ritual, symbolism, and ceremony reinforced social cohesion and moral order. Samurai interactions were structured through formalized behavior, dress codes, martial displays, and ceremonial practices, creating predictable frameworks that communicated rank, intent, and ethical alignment. These rituals were not merely decorative, they functioned as mechanisms for social stability, transmitting values across generations and reinforcing hierarchical relationships. Modern Japanese society retains echoes of these patterns in corporate etiquette, educational practice, and civic ceremony, demonstrating the deep and persistent influence of samurai cultural structures. Gender dynamics within samurai households further complicate the historical picture. Women of the samurai class, particularly onna bugeisha, were trained in both martial and administrative skills, often assuming leadership in times of crisis and contributing to the defense and management of estates. These contributions challenge the perception of the samurai as an exclusively male domain and underscore the multifaceted nature of power and responsibility within feudal society. Recognition of female agency within samurai culture enriches understanding of social organization, ethical expectation, and family dynamics in pre-modern Japan. Economically, samurai status depended on a system of stipends, usually paid in rice, which tied their welfare to agricultural productivity and regional administration. This arrangement reinforced loyalty to the daimyo and created a balance between military service and social oversight. At the same time, it produced vulnerabilities, as mismanagement or crop failure could destabilize both individual livelihoods and broader political structures. The economic integration of samurai authority demonstrates how martial power was inseparable from social and material structures, revealing lessons about governance, accountability, and institutional resilience that remain relevant in modern contexts. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation complemented martial and administrative skill. Zen Buddhism, in particular, influenced samurai practice, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and presence. The tea ceremony, garden design, poetry, and calligraphy all functioned as forms of meditation and ethical reflection, integrating artistic sensitivity with disciplined focus. These practices reinforced self-mastery, ethical clarity, and attentiveness, illustrating how culture and combat training were mutually reinforcing rather than separate domains. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrated adaptability over time. As prolonged periods of peace, particularly during the Edo era, reduced the frequency of warfare, samurai shifted toward administrative, cultural, and educational roles. Martial skills remained central, but were increasingly contextualized within ethical, bureaucratic, and social frameworks. This adaptability reveals that the essence of samurai power was not merely physical strength or tactical skill, but the ability to integrate principle with practice across diverse social demands. Contemporary organizations can draw insights from this historical model, understanding that resilience and ethical coherence are as vital to institutional success as technical proficiency. The social structure of samurai society relied on internalized codes of behavior, which fostered loyalty, cooperation, and predictability within hierarchical systems. However, this system also imposed constraints, suppressing dissent and limiting mobility for lower social classes. Examining the dual nature of these structures provides valuable lessons in balancing authority with flexibility, governance with justice, and collective obligation with individual conscience. Warfare and strategic thinking were central to the samurai ethos, yet the skills cultivated on the battlefield extended to administrative, diplomatic, and ethical contexts. The emphasis on preparation, anticipation, and psychological readiness shaped both personal conduct and collective governance, creating a culture where foresight and moral judgment were inseparable. Modern parallels can be seen in strategic management, crisis response, and ethical decision-making, illustrating the continued relevance of samurai training principles in contemporary society. Ethical behavior among the samurai extended to interpersonal relations, emphasizing respect, benevolence, honesty, and loyalty. These interpersonal codes regulated conduct within the warrior class and toward commoners, fostering trust and social stability. While historical realities included coercion and inequality, the codified ethical standards provide enduring frameworks for understanding integrity, responsibility, and relational ethics in any hierarchical system. The cultural transmission of samurai values relied on diverse media, including chronicles, oral storytelling, visual arts, literature, theater, and later popular culture. Each medium emphasized different facets of the samurai experience, from heroism and loyalty to ethical struggle and human vulnerability. This multiplicity ensured that the samurai legacy was multifaceted and adaptable, capable of informing moral.
The samurai era, when viewed in its full historical, cultural, and psychological scope, reveals an intricate tapestry of values, institutions, and lived experiences that extends far beyond the mere image of armored warriors on the battlefield. By the 13th part of this comprehensive exploration, it is crucial to focus on the mechanisms through which the samurai shaped and transmitted ethical, social, and cultural norms, ensuring that their influence persisted long after the dissolution of their formal class structures. The samurai were simultaneously warriors, administrators, educators, and cultural patrons, embodying a system in which martial prowess, governance, ethical conduct, and aesthetic cultivation were inextricably linked. Their identity was grounded in a coherent worldview, expressed most famously through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which codified virtues such as loyalty, honor, courage, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido functioned not only as a personal moral compass, but also as a social regulator, guiding behavior within hierarchical structures and reinforcing cohesion across complex feudal domains. Yet the interpretation and application of these values were often situational, requiring discernment, adaptability, and ethical judgment, qualities that allowed the samurai to navigate periods of both conflict and prolonged peace effectively. The administrative role of the samurai extended beyond martial engagement. Samurai were often responsible for tax collection, legal adjudication, management of estates, and governance of local populations, which required literacy, strategic thinking, negotiation skills, and a nuanced understanding of social dynamics. This combination of martial and bureaucratic capacity allowed samurai to maintain stability within their domains, balance competing interests, and project authority that was simultaneously respected and feared. Their ability to function effectively in both spheres underscores the multidimensional nature of their influence, illustrating how the combination of physical skill and intellectual cultivation can sustain complex social structures over time. Central to the samurai ethos was discipline, which encompassed physical training, ethical reflection, and aesthetic cultivation.
Martial exercises developed precision, endurance, and tactical acumen, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and moral sensitivity. This integrated approach fostered individuals capable of decisive action under pressure while maintaining composure, clarity, and ethical awareness, reflecting a holistic understanding of human development in which body, mind, and spirit were mutually reinforcing. The samurai relationship with death and impermanence shaped both their ethical decisions and psychological orientation. Awareness of mortality was not intended to induce fear, but to cultivate decisiveness, moral clarity, and the capacity to act without hesitation. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified the extreme application of this ethic, where personal honor and social duty could outweigh the instinct for self-preservation. While these practices may appear harsh from a contemporary perspective, they illustrate the depth of moral accountability and the seriousness with which the samurai approached ethical and social responsibility. Ritual and symbolism were fundamental to the structure and coherence of samurai society. Ceremonial practices, formalized interactions, attire, and martial displays served to communicate status, intention, and ethical standing. These rituals were functional, providing predictability and reinforcing shared norms across hierarchically organized communities. Modern Japanese social etiquette, corporate culture, and public ceremony retain echoes of this system, demonstrating the enduring influence of samurai-derived structures of behavior and interaction. Gender roles within samurai households reveal additional complexity. Women of the warrior class, particularly Onna Bugeisha, were trained in martial and administrative skills, assuming leadership in times of crisis and defending family holdings. Their contributions challenge the stereotype of the samurai as exclusively male and highlight the nuanced distribution of responsibility and power within feudal society. Recognizing female agency provides a more comprehensive understanding of ethical, social, and familial dynamics in pre-modern Japan. Economically, samurai status depended on stipends, typically paid in rice, linking their welfare to agricultural production and regional management. This system reinforced loyalty to the daimyo and tied military service to social oversight. It also created vulnerabilities, as crop failures or mismanagement could destabilize both individual livelihoods and political authority. The economic dimension illustrates that martial power was inseparable from social and material structures, offering lessons about governance, accountability, and institutional stability. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation complemented practical skill, with Zen Buddhism exerting profound influence on the samurai worldview. Meditation, calligraphy, poetry, garden design, and the tea ceremony functioned both as ethical exercises and forms of personal refinement. This integrated approach fostered individuals capable of decisive action under pressure while maintaining composure, clarity, and ethical awareness, reflecting a holistic understanding of human development in which body, mind, and spirit were mutually reinforcing. The samurai relationship with death and impermanence shaped both their ethical decisions and psychological orientation. Awareness of mortality was not intended to induce fear, but to cultivate decisiveness, moral clarity, and the capacity to act without hesitation. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified the extreme application of this ethic, where personal honor and social duty could outweigh the instinct for self-preservation. While these practices may appear harsh from a contemporary perspective, they illustrate the depth of moral accountability and the seriousness with which the samurai approached ethical and social responsibility. Ritual and symbolism were fundamental to the structure and coherence of samurai society. Ceremonial practices, formalized interactions, attire, and martial displays served to communicate status, intention, and ethical standing. These rituals were functional, providing predictability and reinforcing shared norms across hierarchically organized communities. Modern Japanese social etiquette, corporate culture, and public ceremony retain echoes of this system, demonstrating the enduring influence of samurai-derived structures of behavior and interaction. Gender roles within samurai households reveal additional complexity. Women of the warrior class, particularly Onna Bugeisha, were trained in martial and administrative skills, assuming leadership in times of crisis and defending family holdings. Their contributions challenge the stereotype of the samurai as exclusively male and highlight the nuanced distribution of responsibility and power within feudal society. Recognizing female agency provides a more comprehensive understanding of ethical, social, and familial dynamics in pre-modern Japan. Economically, samurai status depended on stipends, typically paid in rice, linking their welfare to agricultural production and regional management. This system reinforced loyalty to the daimyo and tied military service to social oversight. It also created vulnerabilities, as crop failures or mismanagement could destabilize both individual livelihoods and political authority. The economic dimension illustrates that martial power was inseparable from social and material structures, offering lessons about governance, accountability, and institutional stability. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation complemented practical skill, with Zen Buddhism exerting profound influence on the samurai worldview. Meditation, calligraphy, poetry, garden design, and the tea ceremony functioned both as ethical exercises and forms of personal refinement. This integrated approach fostered individuals capable of decisive action under pressure while maintaining composure, clarity, and ethical awareness, reflecting a holistic understanding of human development in which body, mind, and spirit were mutually reinforcing. The samurai relationship with death and impermanence shaped both their ethical decisions and psychological orientation. Awareness of mortality was not intended to induce fear, but to cultivate decisiveness, moral clarity, and the capacity to act without hesitation. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified the extreme application of this ethic, where personal honor and social duty could outweigh the instinct for self-preservation. While these practices may appear harsh from a contemporary perspective, they illustrate the depth of moral accountability and the seriousness with which the samurai approached ethical and social responsibility. Ritual and symbolism were fundamental.
The samurai era, when studied comprehensively, reveals itself as an intricate and multi-layered system that influenced not only military, political, and social structures, but also ethical thought, cultural practice, and psychological development. By the 14th part of this exploration, it is essential to examine how the samurai ethos shaped patterns of behavior, interpersonal relations, governance, and artistic expression, establishing principles that persisted long after the formal dissolution of the warrior class. The samurai were not solely combatants. They embodied a codified moral universe articulated through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which integrated courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline into a functional ethical framework. Bushido provided practical guidance for action, decision-making, and interpersonal conduct, while simultaneously reinforcing hierarchical cohesion within feudal domains. Its implementation was experiential, internalized through rigorous training, ritualized practice, and lived experience, rather than solely through texts, ensuring that virtues became habits rather than abstractions. The dual nature of Bushido created both strength and tension. While it fostered moral clarity, discipline, and social order, it also imposed pressures that could result in rigidity, suppression of personal desire, and, at times, the rationalization of violence. Understanding this duality is critical for interpreting both historical practices and the enduring influence of samurai values in contemporary Japan. Administrative responsibilities of the samurai extended beyond combat.
They were often tasked with taxation, legal adjudication, land management, and local governance, requiring literacy, strategic judgment, and negotiation skills. This dual capacity allowed them to act as stabilizers of social and political order, mediating between different classes while maintaining loyalty to their lords. Their effectiveness in these roles underscores the multidimensional nature of the samurai ethos, demonstrating that true influence relied not solely on martial prowess, but on the capacity to integrate principle with practical governance. Discipline was a central pillar of samurai life, encompassing physical, mental, and ethical dimensions. Martial training instilled precision, endurance, and tactical awareness, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and moral discernment. The interplay between physical rigor and ethical reflection created a holistic approach to personal development, allowing samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis without compromising ethical standards or composure. Awareness of mortality and impermanence shaped the psychological orientation of samurai. Death was neither feared nor ignored. It was acknowledged as a constant reality that required moral and practical preparedness. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified this ethic, emphasizing personal responsibility and the primacy of honor over life itself. While extreme by modern standards, these practices reflect a deeply ingrained philosophy in which ethical consistency and social duty were considered paramount, demonstrating the psychological rigor and moral seriousness embedded in samurai culture. Ritual and symbolism were pervasive tools for reinforcing ethical and social norms. Formalized interactions, ceremonial practices, dress codes, and martial displays communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment. These rituals created predictable structures that facilitated social cohesion, allowing hierarchical relationships to function smoothly. Modern Japanese cultural and organizational practices, from corporate etiquette to public ceremonies, retain traces of this ritualized logic, reflecting the enduring impact of samurai-derived systems of order and conduct. Gender dynamics within samurai households complicate traditional narratives. Women, particularly onna bugeisha, were trained in martial techniques and administrative responsibilities, often assuming leadership in crises or defending estates in the absence of male relatives. Their presence illustrates that samurai society relied on a broader distribution of skills and responsibility than is often recognized, highlighting the nuanced social and ethical structures that supported the warrior class. Economically, the samurai were dependent on stipends, typically in the form of rice, linking their livelihood to agricultural productivity and regional administration. This system reinforced loyalty and social hierarchy, while intertwining martial authority with material oversight. Economic fluctuations, poor harvests, or mismanagement could destabilize both individual and regional security, demonstrating the interconnectedness of military, administrative, and economic systems. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to the samurai identity. Zen Buddhism profoundly influenced both ethical practice and cultural expression, promoting mindfulness, self-discipline, and awareness of impermanence. The tea ceremony, poetry, calligraphy, and garden design were not merely artistic pursuits, but exercises in ethical and psychological refinement, cultivating patience, concentration, and moral sensitivity. The interplay between physical rigor and ethical reflection created a holistic approach to personal development, allowing samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis without compromising ethical standards or composure. Awareness of mortality and impermanence shaped the psychological orientation of samurai. Death was neither feared nor ignored. It was acknowledged as a constant reality that required moral and practical preparedness. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified this ethic, emphasizing personal responsibility and the primacy of honor over life itself. While extreme by modern standards, these practices reflect a deeply ingrained philosophy in which ethical consistency and social duty were considered paramount, demonstrating the psychological rigor and moral seriousness embedded in samurai culture. Ritual and symbolism were pervasive tools for reinforcing ethical and social norms.
Formalized interactions, ceremonial practices, dress codes, and martial displays communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment. These rituals created predictable structures that facilitated social cohesion, allowing hierarchical relationships to function smoothly. Modern Japanese cultural and organizational practices, from corporate etiquette to public ceremonies, retain traces of this ritualized logic, reflecting the enduring impact of samurai-derived systems of order and conduct. Gender dynamics within samurai households complicate traditional narratives. Women, particularly onabugeisha, were trained in martial techniques and administrative responsibilities, often assuming leadership in crises or defending estates in the absence of male relatives. Their presence illustrates that samurai society relied on a broader distribution of skills and responsibility than is often recognized, highlighting the nuanced social and ethical structures that supported the warrior class. Economically, the samurai were dependent on stipends, typically in the form of rice, linking their livelihood to agricultural productivity and regional administration. This system reinforced loyalty and social hierarchy while intertwining martial authority with material oversight. Economic fluctuations, poor harvests, or mismanagement could destabilize both individual and regional security, demonstrating the interconnectedness of military, administrative, and economic systems. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to the samurai identity. Zen Buddhism profoundly influenced both ethical practice and cultural expression, promoting mindfulness, self-discipline, and awareness of impermanence. The tea ceremony, poetry, calligraphy, and garden design were not merely artistic pursuits, but exercises in ethical and psychological refinement, cultivating patience, concentration, and moral sensitivity. The interplay between physical rigor and ethical reflection created a holistic approach to personal development, allowing samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis without compromising ethical standards or composure. Awareness of mortality and impermanence shaped the psychological orientation of samurai. Death was neither feared nor ignored. It was acknowledged as a constant reality that required moral and practical preparedness. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified this ethic, emphasizing personal responsibility and the primacy of honor over life itself. While extreme by modern standards, these practices reflect a deeply ingrained philosophy in which ethical consistency and social duty were considered paramount, demonstrating the psychological rigor and moral seriousness embedded in samurai culture. Ritual and symbolism were pervasive tools for reinforcing ethical and social norms. Formalized interactions, ceremonial practices, dress codes, and martial displays communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment. These rituals created predictable structures that facilitated social cohesion, allowing hierarchical relationships to function smoothly. Modern Japanese cultural and organizational practices, from corporate etiquette to public ceremonies, retain traces of this ritualized logic, reflecting the enduring impact of samurai-derived systems of order and conduct. Gender dynamics within samurai households complicate traditional narratives. Women, particularly onabugeisha, were trained in martial techniques and administrative responsibilities, often assuming leadership in crises or defending estates in the absence of male relatives. Their presence illustrates that samurai society relied on a broader distribution of skills and responsibility than is often recognized, highlighting the nuanced social and ethical structures that supported the warrior class.
The samurai era, as it unfolded over centuries, represents a profound interweaving of military, social, ethical, and cultural structures that collectively shape the trajectory of Japanese society and continue to influence global perceptions of discipline, honor, and moral conduct. By the 15th part of this exploration, it is crucial to examine not only the internal mechanisms that sustained the samurai class, but also the broader societal implications, long-term cultural effects, and philosophical resonance that this era produced. The samurai were far more than armed warriors. They embodied a comprehensive system of governance, education, ethical training, and aesthetic cultivation. At the core of this system was Bushido, the way of the warrior, which integrated virtues such as courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline into a coherent framework designed to guide action, regulate interpersonal relations, and ensure social cohesion. Bushido functioned both as a personal moral compass and as a societal regulator, providing standards by which the samurai judged themselves and were judged by others, creating a shared understanding of virtue and obligation that extended across hierarchical structures. The internalization of these values was achieved through disciplined training, repeated practice, and immersion in ritualized life, ensuring that ethical conduct became habitual rather than theoretical. This dual role of Bushido, as personal guide and social framework, produced individuals capable of navigating complex ethical and strategic situations, but it also generated tension between individual desire and collective expectation, highlighting the challenges inherent in integrating virtue with hierarchical obligation. Administrative role of samurai was as central as their martial function. Samurai frequently served as tax collectors, local magistrates, estate managers, and military strategists. These responsibilities demanded literacy, negotiation skills, strategic insight, and a nuanced understanding of local social dynamics. Their dual capacity to engage in both governance and warfare exemplified the multidimensional nature of their social function, demonstrating that the power of the samurai was not merely in physical strength, but in the ability to maintain stability and authority through ethical, intellectual, and strategic competence. Discipline underpinned both martial and administrative functions. Physical training developed precision, endurance, and tactical acumen, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, ethical sensitivity, and psychological resilience. The integration of these domains reflects a holistic understanding of human development, wherein mastery of the body, mind, and spirit were mutually reinforcing. This comprehensive approach enabled samurai to act decisively under pressure while maintaining moral clarity and composure. Awareness of mortality was another central element of samurai philosophy. Death was recognized as an inevitable part of life, prompting practices that cultivated courage, decisiveness, and ethical responsibility. Ritualized acts such as seppuku emphasized the primacy of honor and social duty over individual survival, demonstrating the depth of moral seriousness inherent in samurai culture. While extreme from a modern perspective, these practices reveal a coherent psychological and ethical system designed to reconcile human mortality with ethical conduct and social expectation. Ritual and symbolism structured daily life and social interaction, embedding ethical codes within predictable, formalized practices. Ceremonial behavior, dress codes, and martial displays communicated rank, intention, and ethical alignment, fostering cohesion and predictability within hierarchical structures. Modern Japanese culture, in its business etiquette, ceremonial observances, and public rituals, retains echoes of this system, illustrating the enduring influence of samurai-derived structures of behavior and social regulation. Gender roles within samurai households further complicate historical understanding. Women, especially onabugeisha, were trained in martial and administrative skills, taking on leadership and defensive roles when necessary. Their participation challenges the perception of the samurai as exclusively male and highlights the nuanced social and ethical responsibilities shared within the household. Recognizing female agency provides a more comprehensive understanding of governance, defense, and ethical practice in feudal society. Economically, samurai were reliant on stipends, usually in rice, linking their welfare to agricultural production and local administration. This system reinforced loyalty, integrated martial and bureaucratic authority, and tied social stability to material management.
Economic fluctuations, crop failures, or mismanagement could threaten both individual livelihoods and regional political stability, illustrating the interdependence of military, social, and economic structures within samurai governance. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation played a central role in samurai life. Zen Buddhism influenced mental discipline, ethical reflection, and artistic practice, promoting mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. The tea ceremony, poetry, calligraphy, and garden design functioned as exercises in self-discipline, concentration, and ethical awareness. These practices demonstrate the integration of ethical, aesthetic, and practical development, fostering individuals capable of both decisive action and reflective judgment, a combination that supported both personal and social stability. The evolution of samurai institutions highlights adaptability. During prolonged periods of peace, martial skill became increasingly subordinated to administrative competence, cultural refinement, and ethical reflection. This shift demonstrates that the samurai maintained influence not merely through physical prowess, but through the consistent application of principle across changing circumstances. Modern organizations and societies can learn from this adaptive approach, understanding that resilience and ethical coherence are as critical as technical competence in sustaining institutional integrity. Social cohesion depended on internalized ethical codes, promoting loyalty, predictability, and cooperation. However, these codes also imposed constraints, suppressing dissent and limiting social mobility for lower classes. Recognizing both the stabilizing and restrictive effects of hierarchical systems provides insight into balancing authority, accountability, and flexibility within complex societies. Warfare and strategy were central to samurai identity, but these skills extended into governance, negotiation, and ethical decision-making. Preparedness, foresight, and psychological readiness were cultivated as integral parts of daily life, reflecting a holistic integration of martial, administrative, and ethical competencies. Ethical conduct extended to interpersonal relationships, emphasizing respect, loyalty, honesty, and benevolence. These norms facilitated trust and social cohesion within the samurai class. While historical realities included coercion and inequality, the codified ethical principles offer enduring frameworks for relational integrity, applicable in contemporary organizational, professional, and civic contexts. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on chronicles, oral traditions, theater, literature, visual arts, and in later eras, cinema and popular media. Each medium emphasized different facets of samurai life, including heroism, moral conflict, loyalty, and vulnerability. This diversity ensured adaptability and relevance across generations, allowing samurai principles to inform moral reflection, aesthetic practice, and social organization. Education and mentorship were essential to sustaining samurai skills and ethical understanding. Knowledge was transmitted experientially through observation, repetition, and reflection, emphasizing the integration of technical mastery with ethical judgment. Modern pedagogy that emphasizes applied learning, mentorship, and character development reflects the enduring influence of samurai instructional methods. Psychological discipline developed through such training cultivated resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to inform contemporary cultural and professional norms. The samurai era exemplifies the integration of martial, ethical, and aesthetic development into a unified system of personal and social cultivation, revealing sophisticated approaches to human potential, moral reasoning, and social organization. In conclusion, Part 15 emphasizes that samurai were not merely warriors, they were administrators, ethicists, cultural patrons, and architects of social cohesion. Their influence extended into governance, economic systems, aesthetic cultivation, education, and interpersonal ethics. Understanding the samurai era in its full complexity provides enduring insights on balancing authority with autonomy, discipline with creativity, individual responsibility with collective obligation, and tradition with adaptability.
The samurai era, encompassing centuries of Japanese history, represents a uniquely interwoven system of military, social, ethical, and cultural structures that shaped not only the course of Japanese society, but also its psychological and philosophical identity. By the 16th part of this exploration, it is necessary to examine the deeper nuances of how the samurai ethos influenced governance, interpersonal behavior, artistic expression, and long-term social stability, revealing an enduring legacy that extends far beyond the historical period itself. The samurai were far more than fighters. They were bearers of a coherent moral universe, expressed through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which codified principles of courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido functioned as both a personal compass and a social regulator, establishing ethical expectations and hierarchical cohesion. It was not a theoretical construct, but a lived philosophy, internalized through rigorous training, repetitive ritual, and immersive social experience, ensuring that virtues were habitual and practically enacted rather than abstract. The dual nature of Bushido created both moral clarity and tension. While it cultivated discipline, ethical discernment, and social harmony, it also imposed pressures that could lead to rigidity, suppression of personal desire, and rationalization of violence. Recognizing this duality is essential to understanding the samurai's influence and the continuing relevance of their values in contemporary ethical and organizational frameworks. Administrative responsibilities were central to samurai life. Samurai frequently served as magistrates, estate managers, tax collectors, and military strategists. These roles required literacy, strategic acumen, negotiation skills, and deep understanding of local social conditions. The ability to combine martial skill with bureaucratic competence allowed the samurai to maintain stability across feudal domains, mediate between social classes, and enforce loyalty while avoiding unnecessary conflict. This dual capacity underscores the multidimensional nature of samurai authority, revealing that their power was not merely in physical dominance, but in ethical governance, strategic foresight, and social mediation. Discipline formed the core of samurai identity, encompassing physical, ethical, and psychological dimensions. Martial training emphasized precision, endurance, and tactical awareness, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated patience, focus, and ethical sensitivity. This holistic approach fostered individuals capable of decisive action, moral clarity, and composure, demonstrating an integrated model of personal development in which body, mind, and spirit were mutually reinforcing. Mortality and the impermanence of life were central to the samurai worldview. Death was neither feared nor ignored. It was acknowledged as an inevitable reality that required ethical readiness and practical preparation. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified the extremity of this ethic, emphasizing personal honor and social responsibility above individual survival. While such practices are extreme from a modern perspective, they reveal the samurai's profound commitment to moral accountability, the cultivation of courage, and the primacy of ethical consistency. Ritual and symbolism were foundational in organizing social interaction and reinforcing ethical codes. Ceremonial behaviors, formalized greetings, attire, and martial displays communicated rank, intent, and moral alignment. These rituals provided predictability, reinforced hierarchy, and fostered cohesion within feudal domains. Traces of this system remain in contemporary Japanese business practices, educational rituals, and public ceremonies, demonstrating the enduring influence of samurai-derived behavioral structures.
Gender dynamics within samurai households complicate simplistic narratives of male-dominated martial society. Women, especially onna bugeisha, were trained in martial techniques and household administration, assuming leadership and defense responsibilities in times of crisis. Their involvement illustrates that samurai authority relied on a distributed skill set, highlighting nuanced social and ethical responsibilities within families and domains. Economically, samurai were tied to stipends, typically in rice, linking their welfare to agricultural productivity and regional governance. This arrangement reinforced loyalty, integrated martial and administrative authority, and structured social stability. Economic fluctuations, crop failures, or mismanagement could destabilize individual livelihoods and regional authority, demonstrating the interdependence of military, administrative, and economic structures in sustaining samurai governance. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to samurai life. Zen Buddhism shaped mental discipline, ethical reflection, and artistic practice, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. Practices such as the tea ceremony, calligraphy, poetry, and garden design were not mere aesthetic pursuits. They fostered concentration, patience, self-awareness, and ethical sensibility. The integration of artistic and martial training illustrated the samurai's holistic approach to human development, in which reflective practice enhanced practical skill and ethical judgment. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrates adaptability. During long periods of peace, martial skill became secondary to administrative competence, ethical reflection, and cultural cultivation. This shift underscores that the power of the samurai lay not solely in force, but in the consistent application of principle across changing circumstances. Contemporary organizations can learn from this adaptability, understanding that resilience, ethical coherence, and flexibility are as crucial as technical or operational skill. Social cohesion relied on internalized codes of conduct, promoting loyalty, predictability, and cooperation. Simultaneously, these codes constrained dissent and limited social mobility for lower classes. The samurai experience offers insight into balancing hierarchical authority with ethical responsibility, individual autonomy, and collective obligation in complex societies. Warfare and strategy were integral to samurai identity, but these skills extended into governance, diplomacy, and moral reasoning. Foresight, psychological preparation, and ethical judgment were cultivated alongside martial ability, producing individuals capable of both decisive action and reflective decision-making. Modern leadership, organizational strategy, and crisis management echo these principles, emphasizing anticipation, ethical deliberation, and adaptability. Ethical conduct governed interpersonal relationships, emphasizing respect, honesty, loyalty, and benevolence. These norms facilitated trust and cohesion within the samurai class and between samurai and commoners. While historical inequalities existed, the codified ethical standards offer enduring frameworks for relational integrity in contemporary social and organizational contexts. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on multiple media, including chronicles, oral traditions, theater, literature, visual art, and later cinema and popular culture. Each medium emphasized different aspects of samurai life, from martial heroism and loyalty to moral struggle and vulnerability. This diversity ensured adaptability and resonance across generations, allowing samurai principles to inform moral reflection, aesthetic sensibility, and social organization. Education and mentorship were central to sustaining samurai skills and ethical understanding. Knowledge was transmitted experientially through observation, practice, and reflective guidance, integrating technical mastery with moral discernment. Modern pedagogical approaches that prioritize applied learning, mentorship, and character development reflect the continued influence of samurai instructional strategies. Psychological discipline cultivated through such methods fostered resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to inform contemporary culture, professional conduct, and personal development practices. The samurai era exemplifies the integration of martial, ethical, and aesthetic cultivation into a coherent system of personal and social development, revealing a sophisticated understanding of human capacity, ethical reasoning, and social cohesion. In conclusion, Part 16 emphasizes that the samurai were more than warriors. They were administrators, ethicists, cultural patrons, and architects of social and moral order. Their influence extended into governance, economic management, aesthetic practice, education, and interpersonal ethics.
The samurai era, spanning several centuries of Japanese history, represents a deeply interconnected system of military, social, ethical, and cultural structures that shaped the development of Japanese society and left an enduring legacy that continues to influence modern culture and thought. By the 17th part of this exploration, it is essential to delve into the ways in which the samurai ethos permeated daily life, governance, interpersonal behavior, artistic expression, and philosophical reflection, creating a multidimensional framework that ensured both social cohesion and moral accountability. Samurai were far more than warriors. They were embodiments of a coherent moral and social philosophy articulated through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which codified virtues such as courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido functioned as both a personal ethical guide and a societal regulator, providing standards by which the samurai judged themselves and were judged by others, reinforcing hierarchical structures and promoting social harmony. Its principles were internalized through rigorous training, repeated practice, and immersion in ritualized social life, ensuring that ethical behavior became habitual rather than theoretical. This dual nature of Bushido created both moral clarity and tension. While it cultivated discipline, ethical judgment, and social order, it could also result in rigidity, suppression of individual desire, and rationalization of coercive acts. Understanding this duality is critical to comprehending the complexity and enduring relevance of samurai culture in shaping both historical and contemporary frameworks of authority, ethics, and leadership. The administrative dimension of the samurai role was as important as martial prowess. Samurai frequently held positions as estate managers, tax collectors, military strategists, and local magistrates. These roles required literacy, negotiation skills, strategic insight, and an understanding of social dynamics. By combining martial ability with bureaucratic competence, samurai were able to maintain stability in their domains, enforce loyalty to their lords, and mediate conflicts across social strata. This integration of ethical, intellectual, and physical competence illustrates that samurai power relied on the ability to govern and administer as effectively as it did to wage war. Discipline formed the foundation of samurai life across physical, mental, and ethical dimensions. Martial training emphasized precision, endurance, and tactical awareness, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and moral sensitivity. The integration of these practices created a holistic model of personal development in which mastery of body, mind, and spirit reinforced one another. This approach enabled samurai to act decisively in times of crisis while maintaining ethical integrity, composure, and reflective judgment. The relationship of the samurai to mortality and impermanence was central to their ethical and psychological worldview.
Awareness of death was neither morbid nor feared. It was recognized as an inevitable reality that demanded preparedness, moral responsibility, and decisiveness. Ritual practices such as seppuku exemplified the extremes of this ethic, demonstrating the primacy of honor, social duty, and ethical consistency over individual survival. While such practices may appear extreme by modern standards, they reflect the rigor with which the samurai integrated ethical and psychological discipline into their lives. Ritual, symbolism, and formalized behavior were essential mechanisms for maintaining social order and ethical conformity. Ceremonial interactions, dress codes, and martial displays communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment, creating predictability and cohesion within hierarchical structures. These ritualized practices extended ethical principles into everyday conduct, reinforcing social norms and cultural continuity. Modern Japanese social and organizational behavior, from business etiquette to public ceremony, continues to reflect these samurai-derived systems of order and symbolic communication. Gender dynamics within samurai households add complexity to historical narratives. Women, particularly onna bugeisha, were trained in martial techniques and administrative responsibilities, often assuming leadership and defensive roles in times of crisis. Their participation underscores that samurai authority was distributed and that household management and defense required the skill and judgment of both genders. Recognition of female agency provides a more nuanced understanding of samurai society, demonstrating the integration of social responsibility, ethical conduct, and martial capability across gender lines. Economically, samurai status depended on stipends, often in the form of rice, tying their livelihood to agricultural productivity and local governance. This system reinforced loyalty to the daimyo while linking military, administrative, and economic functions. Crop failures, mismanagement, or external pressures could destabilize both individual and regional security, illustrating the interconnectedness of samurai responsibilities and the complex balance of power, economy, and social stability. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to samurai identity. Zen Buddhism influenced mental discipline, ethical reflection, and artistic practice, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. The tea ceremony, calligraphy, poetry, and the garden design functioned as exercises in self-discipline, concentration, and ethical sensibility. This integration of martial, aesthetic, and ethical training created individuals capable of decisive action, reflective judgment, and aesthetic appreciation, demonstrating the sophisticated interplay between practical skill and moral development. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrates adaptability and resilience. During periods of extended peace, martial skill became increasingly subordinated to administrative competence, cultural refinement, and ethical reflection. This shift illustrates that samurai influence rested not solely on physical prowess, but on consistent adherence to principle and the ability to adapt ethical and practical skills to changing social conditions. Modern institutions and organizations can draw lessons from this adaptive capacity, recognizing that resilience, ethical coherence, and versatility are as essential as technical proficiency. Social cohesion relied on internalized codes of behavior, promoting loyalty, cooperation, and predictability, while simultaneously constraining dissent and limiting social mobility for lower classes. This duality offers insight into balancing hierarchical authority with ethical responsibility, individual autonomy, and collective obligation. Warfare and strategy were central to samurai identity, but these skills extended into governance, negotiation, and moral reasoning. foresight, preparation, and ethical judgment were cultivated alongside martial ability, producing individuals capable of decisive action and reflective consideration. Contemporary leadership, strategic planning, and crisis management echo these principles, highlighting the enduring relevance of samurai approaches to foresight, adaptability, and ethical responsibility. Interpersonal ethics emphasized respect, loyalty, honesty, and benevolence. These norms facilitated trust and cohesion, both within the samurai class and in interactions with commoners, providing a framework for relational integrity that continues to inform organizational and civic ethics. While historical inequalities existed, the codification of ethical conduct remains a model for understanding the interplay of morality and social cohesion. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on chronicles, oral traditions, theater, literature, visual art, and later popular media such as film. Each medium emphasized different facets of samurai life, including heroism, moral struggle, loyalty, and vulnerability. This diversity ensured the persistence, adaptability, and relevance of samurai principles across generations and contexts. Education and mentorship were critical to sustaining samurai skills and ethical understanding. Knowledge was transmitted experientially, emphasizing observation, repetition, and ethical reflection. Modern pedagogical approaches that prioritize mentorship, applied learning, and character development reflect the enduring influence of samurai educational strategies. Psychological discipline cultivated through these methods fostered resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to inform contemporary culture.
The samurai era represents a unique convergence of military discipline, social organization, ethical philosophy, and cultural refinement that shaped the trajectory of Japanese history and continues to influence both domestic and global perceptions of honor, duty, and personal cultivation. By the 18th part of this detailed examination, it is essential to analyze the broader societal and psychological mechanisms through which samurai practices created cohesion, transmitted values, and shaped the ethical and aesthetic dimensions of Japanese life. Samurai were not simply warriors, they were the embodiment of an integrated moral and social philosophy articulated through Bushido, the way of the warrior, which codified virtues such as courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido functioned both as a personal moral compass and as a social framework, establishing expectations of behavior and ethical standards that reinforced hierarchical cohesion, regulated interpersonal interactions, and guided governance. These principles were internalized through disciplined training, ritual practice, mentorship, and lived experience, ensuring that ethical conduct became habitual and actionable rather than merely theoretical. The duality of Bushido fostered moral clarity and social cohesion, yet it also imposed constraints and pressures. While it promoted integrity, responsibility, and social stability, it could simultaneously encourage rigidity, suppression of personal desire, and the ethical justification of coercive acts. Understanding this duality is crucial for comprehending the nuanced influence of the samurai on both historical governance and contemporary interpretations of leadership, ethics, and strategic behavior. Administrative and governance responsibilities were central to the samurai's role. Samurai frequently served as estate managers, tax collectors, local magistrates, and military strategists. These duties required literacy, negotiation skills, analytical reasoning, and an acute awareness of social dynamics. Their dual capacity to exercise both martial and bureaucratic authority enabled them to stabilize domains, mediate disputes across social strata, and ensure loyalty to their lords. The integration of ethical, intellectual, and martial competencies illustrates that samurai authority rested on a combination of moral principle, strategic foresight, and practical governance, rather than solely on physical dominance. Discipline, both physical and mental, underpinned samurai life. Martial training developed precision, endurance,
tactical acumen, and situational awareness, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and ethical sensitivity. This integration of practices represents a holistic approach to human development, where mastery of the body, mind, and spirit reinforced one another, enabling samurai to act decisively under pressure while maintaining composure, moral clarity, and reflective judgment. Mortality and the impermanence of life were central to samurai philosophical outlooks. Death was neither feared nor ignored, rather it was acknowledged as an inevitable part of existence that required ethical and practical preparedness. Ritualized acts such as seppuku exemplified the extremes of this philosophy, emphasizing the primacy of honor, social duty, and ethical consistency over individual survival. While these practices may seem extreme from a contemporary perspective, they reveal the depth of moral seriousness, psychological discipline, and social accountability inherent in samurai culture. Ritual, symbolism, and ceremonial practice played critical roles in structuring social interaction and reinforcing ethical and hierarchical norms. Formalized greetings, attire, martial displays, and ceremonial conduct communicated rank, intent, and moral alignment. These rituals provided predictability, fostered cohesion, and embedded ethical principles into daily life. Modern Japanese social practices, corporate etiquette, and public ceremonies retain echoes of these ritualized structures, demonstrating the enduring impact of samurai social and moral organization. Gender dynamics within samurai households provide further insight into the complexity of their society. Women, particularly onabugeisha, were trained in martial skills and administrative responsibilities, assuming leadership and defensive roles when necessary. Their participation highlights the distribution of authority and responsibility within households and domains, challenging narratives that depict the samurai as exclusively male-dominated. Recognizing female agency adds nuance to understanding samurai governance, ethical practice, and defense strategy. Economically, samurai were dependent on stipends, often paid in rice, linking their status to agricultural productivity and local administration. This system reinforced loyalty, connected military and bureaucratic authority, and created a balance between service and material sustenance. Economic disruptions, poor harvests, or mismanagement could destabilize both personal and regional stability, illustrating the interdependence of military, administrative, and economic structures in maintaining social order. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to samurai identity. Zen Buddhism influenced ethical reflection, psychological discipline, and artistic engagement, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. Practices such as the tea ceremony, poetry, calligraphy, and garden design were not merely artistic, but functioned as exercises in self-discipline, focus, and ethical sensitivity. The integration of aesthetic and martial cultivation created individuals capable of decisive action and reflective judgment, illustrating the holistic approach to personal and social development characteristic of the samurai ethos. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrates adaptability. During periods of prolonged peace, martial skill became secondary to administrative competence, ethical reflection, and cultural refinement. This shift highlights that the power and influence of samurai rested not only on physical prowess, but on the consistent application of principle, moral integrity, and strategic insight, ensuring their relevance across changing historical contexts. Contemporary organizations can draw lessons from this adaptability, recognizing that resilience, ethical coherence, and flexibility are as essential as operational skill or technical expertise. Social cohesion depended on internalized ethical codes that promoted loyalty, cooperation, and predictability, while simultaneously constraining dissent and limiting social mobility for lower classes. The samurai system illustrates the balance between hierarchical authority, ethical responsibility, individual autonomy, and collective obligation, providing insights for modern social and organizational structures. Warfare and strategic thinking were central to samurai identity, but these skills extended into governance, negotiation, and moral reasoning. Foresight, preparation, and ethical judgment were cultivated alongside martial proficiency, producing individuals capable of decisive action and thoughtful deliberation. Interpersonal ethics emphasized respect, loyalty, honesty, and benevolence, fostering trust and cohesion within the samurai class and between samurai and commoners. While historical inequalities existed, codified ethical norms provide enduring frameworks for relational integrity and social accountability. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on chronicles, oral traditions, theater, literature, visual arts, and, in later centuries, cinema and popular culture. Each medium highlighted different facets of samurai life, from heroism and loyalty to moral conflict and human vulnerability. This diversity ensured adaptability and continuity, allowing samurai principles to influence moral reflection, aesthetic development, and social practice across generations. Education and mentorship were central to maintaining samurai skills and ethical understanding. Knowledge was transmitted experientially through observation, practice, and reflective guidance, integrating technical mastery with moral discernment. Contemporary pedagogical methods that emphasize mentorship, applied learning, and character development reflect the continued influence of samurai instructional strategies. Psychological discipline cultivated through these methods fostered resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to inform cultural, professional, and personal development practices. The samurai era exemplifies the integration of martial, ethical, and aesthetic cultivation into a coherent system of personal and social development, offering profound insights into human capacity, moral reasoning, and social cohesion. In conclusion, Part 18 emphasizes that the samurai were not merely warriors, but administrators, ethicists, cultural patrons, and architects of moral and social order. Their influence extended into governance, economic oversight, artistic practice, education, and interpersonal ethics. Understanding the samurai era in its full complexity provides enduring lessons on balancing authority with autonomy, discipline with creativity, individual responsibility with collective obligation, and tradition with adaptability. The legacy of the samurai persists not as a model to replicate, but as a source of critical reflection, offering guidance on resilience, ethical integrity, holistic cultivation, and the responsible exercise of power.
The samurai era, encompassing several centuries of Japanese history, represents a remarkable convergence of military expertise, ethical philosophy, social governance, and cultural refinement, creating a multifaceted framework that shaped Japanese society and continues to inform global perceptions of honor, discipline, and personal development. By the 19th part of this comprehensive exploration, it is crucial to examine the lasting influence of the samurai on social structures, cultural practices, psychological conditioning, and ethical norms, highlighting how these warriors functioned not merely as combatants, but as architects of a highly structured society and custodians of moral, aesthetic, and administrative traditions. The samurai were defined by their adherence to Bushido, the way of the warrior, which codified virtues such as courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido served as both a personal ethical compass and a social framework, setting standards for behavior that promoted hierarchical cohesion, regulated interpersonal relationships, and guided political governance. This system was internalized not through passive instruction alone, but through immersive training, repetitive practice, ritualized living, and mentorship, ensuring that ethical principles became habitual, practical, and actionable, rather than merely theoretical. The dual function of Bushido created both clarity and constraint. While it fostered moral integrity, social cohesion, and disciplined action, it also imposed strictures that could suppress personal inclination, rationalize coercion, and enforce conformity. Understanding this tension is essential for appreciating the depth of samurai influence, both historically and in the context of modern interpretations of leadership, ethics, and social organization.
Beyond the battlefield, samurai were integral to governance and administration. They often served as estate managers, local magistrates, tax collectors, and military strategists, roles that demanded literacy, strategic insight, negotiation skills, and keen awareness of social dynamics. Their ability to integrate martial competence with bureaucratic skill enabled them to maintain order, mediate conflicts, and ensure loyalty to their lords, illustrating that true samurai authority rested on moral, intellectual, and strategic capability, in addition to physical prowess. Discipline was the cornerstone of samurai life, encompassing physical, mental, and ethical domains. Martial training developed precision, stamina, tactical awareness, and readiness for conflict, while meditation, calligraphy, poetry, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and moral sensitivity. The integration of these disciplines created a holistic model of human development, in which mastery of body, mind, and spirit reinforced one another, allowing samurai to act decisively and ethically under pressure, while maintaining composure, clarity, and reflection. Awareness of mortality and the impermanence of life was central to samurai philosophy. Death was not feared nor ignored, but understood as an inevitable reality requiring ethical preparedness and psychological discipline. Rituals such as seppuku exemplified the extremity of this ethic, placing honor, social duty, and ethical consistency above the instinct for self-preservation. While these practices may appear severe by modern standards, they reveal the depth of commitment to moral accountability, courage, and the integration of ethical and practical discipline within samurai culture. Ritual, symbolism, and ceremonial behavior played a critical role in regulating social interaction and reinforcing hierarchical and ethical norms. Ceremonial greetings, attire, martial displays, and formal conduct communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment, providing structure, predictability, and cohesion within social hierarchies. Contemporary Japanese corporate, educational, and public rituals retain elements of these symbolic structures, reflecting the enduring impact of samurai-derived behavioral and social frameworks. Gender roles within samurai households illustrate the complexity of this social system. Women, particularly anabugeisha, were trained in martial skills and household administration, often assuming leadership and defensive responsibilities in times of crisis. Their involvement demonstrates that authority and ethical responsibility were distributed across households, challenging simplistic narratives of exclusively male martial dominance and highlighting nuanced approaches to social stability and ethical practice. Economically, samurai status was dependent on stipends, typically provided in rice, tying their material security to agricultural productivity and local governance. This system reinforced loyalty, integrated martial and bureaucratic functions, and required careful management of resources. Economic disruption, crop failures, or mismanagement could destabilize both personal welfare and regional authority, demonstrating the interconnectedness of economic, military, and administrative structures in maintaining social stability. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was integral to samurai identity. Zen Buddhism informed mental discipline, ethical reflection, and artistic practice, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. This integration of artistic and martial practices created individuals capable of decisive action, reflective judgment, and aesthetic appreciation, illustrating a holistic approach to personal and social development unique to samurai culture. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrates adaptability. During extended periods of peace, martial expertise became secondary to administrative competence, ethical reflection, and cultural cultivation. This shift emphasizes that samurai influence rested not merely on physical skill, but on the consistent application of ethical principle, intellectual acumen, and strategic judgment, ensuring their relevance across changing historical contexts. Modern organizations and leadership models can draw lessons from this adaptability, understanding that ethical coherence, strategic foresight, and flexibility are as crucial as technical competence. Social cohesion depended on internalized ethical codes that promoted loyalty, predictability, and cooperation, while simultaneously constraining dissent and limiting social mobility for lower classes. The samurai system illustrates the complex balance between hierarchical authority, ethical responsibility, individual agency, and collective obligation, offering insights for contemporary social and organizational analysis. Warfare and strategic planning were central to samurai identity, but these skills extended into governance, diplomacy, and moral reasoning. Anticipation, preparedness, and ethical judgment were cultivated alongside martial training, producing individuals capable of decisive action, tempered by reflection. Modern leadership, strategic management, and crisis resolution echo these principles, highlighting the ongoing relevance of samurai approaches to foresight, adaptability, and ethical responsibility. Interpersonal ethics emphasized respect, loyalty, honesty, and benevolence, facilitating trust and cohesion within the samurai class and between samurai and commoners. Despite historical social inequalities, codified ethical norms offer enduring frameworks for relational integrity and responsible social conduct. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on chronicles, oral histories, theater, literature, visual art, and later cinema and popular media. Each medium emphasized different facets of samurai life, from martial heroism and loyalty to moral struggle and human vulnerability, ensuring the continuity and adaptability of these principles across generations. Education and mentorship were central to preserving samurai skills, ethical understanding, and cultural knowledge. Knowledge was transmitted experientially through observation, practice, and reflective guidance, integrating technical mastery with moral discernment. Modern pedagogical methods emphasizing mentorship, applied learning, and character development reflect the enduring influence of samurai educational practices. Psychological discipline cultivated through these methods fostered resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to shape contemporary cultural, professional, and personal development. The samurai era exemplifies the integration of martial, ethical, and aesthetic cultivation into a coherent system of personal and social development, providing sophisticated insights into human capacity, moral reasoning, and social cohesion. In conclusion, Part 19 underscores that the samurai were not merely warriors, but administrators, ethicists, cultural patrons, and architects of social and moral order. Their influence extended into governance, economic systems, aesthetic practice, education, and interpersonal ethics. Understanding the samurai era in its full complexity provides enduring lessons on balancing authority with autonomy, discipline with creativity.
The samurai era represents the culmination of centuries of Japanese history in which martial skill, ethical philosophy, administrative responsibility, and cultural cultivation were integrated into a coherent system that shaped both the social and moral framework of Japan. By the 20th and final part of this comprehensive exploration, it is crucial to reflect not only on the historical development of the samurai class, but also on its enduring influence on Japanese society, governance, culture, and psychology, as well as on the global imagination of what it means to live a life guided by discipline, honor, and ethical responsibility. The samurai were defined by their adherence to Bushido, the way of the warrior, a codified ethical system encompassing courage, loyalty, honor, benevolence, honesty, and self-discipline. Bushido functioned as both a personal moral compass and a social regulator, providing standards for behavior, guiding interpersonal interactions, and ensuring cohesion within the hierarchical structure of feudal Japan. Its principles were internalized through disciplined training, ritualized practice, mentorship, and immersive experience, transforming ethical precepts into habitual, practical, and actionable behaviors. The duality inherent in Bushido fostered moral clarity and social order while simultaneously imposing constraints and pressures. While it cultivated integrity, loyalty, and disciplined action, it could also suppress personal inclination, rationalize coercion, and enforce strict conformity. Recognizing this tension is essential to understanding the depth and complexity of samurai influence on both historical governance and modern ethical and leadership paradigms. Samurai responsibilities extended far beyond the battlefield. They served as administrators, estate managers, tax collectors, military strategists, and local magistrates, requiring literacy, negotiation skills, strategic insight, and keen awareness of social dynamics. This multidimensional authority illustrates that samurai power rested on a combination of ethical integrity, intellectual acumen, strategic foresight, and martial skill. Discipline was central to samurai identity, encompassing physical, mental, and ethical domains. Martial training developed strength, precision, endurance, tactical awareness, and readiness for combat, while meditation, poetry, calligraphy, and the tea ceremony cultivated focus, patience, and moral sensitivity. The integration of these practices represents a holistic model of human development in which mastery of the body, mind, and spirit reinforced one another. This holistic approach enabled samurai to act decisively in moments of crisis while maintaining ethical clarity, composure, and reflective judgment. Awareness of mortality and the impermanence of life shaped the ethical and psychological orientation of the samurai. Death was neither ignored nor feared. It was acknowledged as an inevitable aspect of existence that demanded preparedness, ethical consistency, and psychological discipline. Ritualized acts such as seppuku exemplified the extremity of this ethic, emphasizing honor, social duty, and moral accountability above personal survival. While such practices may seem extreme by contemporary standards, they reflect the depth of ethical seriousness and psychological training inherent in samurai culture. Ritual and symbolism structured social interaction and reinforced ethical and hierarchical norms. Formalized behavior, attire, martial displays, and ceremonial conduct communicated rank, intention, and moral alignment, creating predictability, cohesion, and stability within social hierarchies. Modern Japanese social practices, business etiquette, and ceremonial observances retain echoes of these symbolic structures, demonstrating the lasting influence of samurai's social and moral organization. Gender roles within samurai households reveal further complexity. Women, particularly onna bugeisha, were trained in martial skills and administrative duties, assuming leadership and defensive responsibilities when necessary. Their participation illustrates the distributed nature of authority and responsibility within households, challenging the notion that samurai power was exclusively male and highlighting the integration of ethical, administrative, and martial functions across gender lines. Economically, samurai relied on stipends, typically in the form of rice, linking their livelihood to agricultural productivity and local governance. This system reinforced loyalty, integrated martial and bureaucratic authority, and required careful resource management. Economic disruption, mismanagement, or crop failure could destabilize both individual and regional stability.
demonstrating the interdependence of economic, administrative, and martial structures in sustaining social order. Philosophical and aesthetic cultivation was central to samurai identity. Zen Buddhism informed mental discipline, ethical reflection, and artistic practice, emphasizing mindfulness, simplicity, and awareness of impermanence. Practices such as the tea ceremony, calligraphy, poetry, and garden design were not mere aesthetic pursuits, but exercises in concentration, ethical sensibility, and personal refinement. The integration of aesthetic and martial training created individuals capable of decisive action, reflective judgment, and aesthetic appreciation, exemplifying the holistic development central to samurai culture. The evolution of samurai institutions demonstrates adaptability and resilience. During prolonged periods of peace, martial skill became secondary to administrative competence, ethical reflection, and cultural refinement. This shift illustrates that samurai influence rested not solely on physical ability, but on the consistent application of ethical principle, strategic judgment, and intellectual acumen, ensuring continued relevance across changing historical contexts. Modern organizations and leadership paradigms can draw lessons from this adaptability, recognizing that resilience, ethical consistency, and flexibility are as critical as technical proficiency or operational skill. Social cohesion depended on internalized ethical codes, promoting loyalty, cooperation, and predictability, while simultaneously constraining dissent and limiting social mobility for lower classes. The samurai system exemplifies the balance between hierarchical authority, ethical responsibility, individual agency, and collective obligation, offering enduring insights for contemporary social and organizational structures. Warfare and strategic thinking were central to samurai identity, yet these competencies extended into governance, diplomacy, and ethical reasoning. Anticipation, preparedness, and moral judgment were cultivated alongside martial skill, producing individuals capable of decisive action tempered by reflection. Modern leadership, strategic planning, and crisis management reflect these principles, highlighting the ongoing relevance of samurai approaches to foresight, adaptability, and ethical responsibility. Interpersonal ethics emphasized respect, loyalty, honesty, and benevolence, facilitating trust and cohesion within the samurai class and in relations with commoners. While historical inequalities existed, codified ethical standards offer enduring models for relational integrity and social accountability. Cultural transmission of samurai values relied on chronicles, oral traditions, theater, literature, visual art, and in later centuries, cinema and popular media. Each medium emphasized different facets of samurai life, from martial heroism and loyalty to moral struggle and human vulnerability, ensuring the persistence, adaptability, and cultural resonance of these principles. Education and mentorship were central to sustaining samurai skills, ethical understanding, and cultural knowledge. Knowledge was transmitted experientially, emphasizing observation, repetitive practice, and reflective guidance, integrating technical mastery with ethical discernment. Contemporary pedagogical approaches that prioritize mentorship, applied learning, and character development reflect the lasting influence of samurai instructional methods. Psychological discipline cultivated through these methods fostered resilience, focus, and adaptability, qualities that continue to shape cultural, professional, and personal development. The samurai era exemplifies the integration of martial, ethical, and aesthetic cultivation into a coherent system of personal and social development, providing profound insights into human capacity, moral reasoning, and social cohesion. In conclusion, Part 20 underscores that the samurai were not merely warriors, but administrators, ethicists,